Ladies and gentlemen, as Aiden said, of the jury right before we went live, because that's kind of how this whole thing has felt recently, Netflix put out quite possibly the worst documentary in history. I'm still working my way through the JonBenet Ramsey case and everything that happened. But I can say for certain that the Netflix documentary is probably one of the most biased and poorly constructed documentary attempts I've ever seen.
Even worse than the MH371 from last year?
The MH371, I feel like the stuff that the MH371 could be accused of ignoring is the kind of thing that you'd have to be me to figure out. And I don't mean like I'm the only one. I mean, if you're a documentary writer, that's not your job.
Yeah, well, your position is unique in the fact that you are a trained historian by trade.
And more importantly, when it comes to Netflix documentaries, I think the big thing here is they can't say the wrong thing. Like, they can't piss people off. Because if they do, those people will sue them. Mm-hmm. As a YouTuber,
we get a little more leeway.
I get to be off the cuff a lot more. Anything I say in this podcast, I can reasonably, in a court of law, say that was me just speaking my opinion in a show where I routinely speak my opinion. If Netflix produces a documentary and they say something that somebody doesn't like, it's a documentary. It wasn't off the cuff. This went through multiple edits. In our case, it's, we're just two guys.
Yep.
So, yeah, the thing is, like, I do take some more risks than Netflix and other documentaries will do as a result of that. But with this one, I was just astonished because, what did they find? Well, in 2000, one of the things that I just saw on Newsweek was, in 2008, the police cleared them. No, they didn't. In 2008, DA Mary Lacey sent a letter to them after another DNA test had been done, which, again, neither exonerated nor incriminated them, and said, I'm so sorry we put you through this. Meanwhile, the DA following her comes out and goes, no, she should not have done that. That's not protocol. That's not what we do. They are not exonerated. They are not cleared.
Speaking of protocol...
Also, from what I understand here, the reasoning, and I'm still looking into this part because this is later down the line. I'm still paying most of my attention to the earlier stuff, 1996 and 1997. Sorry, what were you going to say? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, speaking of protocol, the amount of things that were not protocol throughout the entirety of this investigation, prior to any documentary covering it whatsoever, just from what we covered last week and what we're discussing this week in our upcoming video, it's shocking. And look, given the circumstances, it makes sense to a certain degree. But the things that happened after the fact, once everybody knew what type of investigation it was, what exactly was happening, who the suspects were, and what needed to be done, the continuous levels of either complacency or incompetence that occurred through a variety of different people and organizations is shocking.
That's the part that frustrates me the most is, people who've watched this show, you've seen me over and over and over again go, the police botched this, the police botched this, the police botched this. Like, this is all on the police. This is all on the RCMP. This is all on the FBI. It's not the same here. And Netflix almost came out of the gate with it. Like, this was all on the police. They botched it. They got tunnel vision from the very beginning. They didn't know what they were doing. You're right. They didn't know what they were doing because they didn't have a single homicide detective on staff because the DA preferred to settle everything through plea deals. They never actually had to investigate a homicide.
Oh, and this is also in a town where the first homicide that happened that year
was this one.
Exactly.
They made it this was what, 6 days from the end of the year? Without a murder?
It was the 25th or 6th, depending on who you're talking to.
So most of the murders they were dealing with in Boulder between 1991 and 1996 were obvious. It wasn't the kind of thing where you needed to go and do an intensive police investigation. JonBenet comes around, they don't really have anybody who is a trained homicide detective. And another thing that I think gets glossed over is it's not just the fact that, the DA was avoidant when it came to properly prosecuting anybody. The experienced members of the force had been leaving in droves for years by this point because Chief Kobe, and this is something I go over in detail in this week's video, just had a horrible style of policing. He might as well have been a social worker. And like, yeah, there's times when a social worker is probably the better answer, but not a homicide. They needed people who knew what they were doing, and realistically, they needed the FBI. If you don't have homicide detectives and there's a homicide, you can call in the FBI. You can at least request their assistance. They had confirmation from the FBI, from multiple agents, that if they requested assistance, the FBI would assist. They had that, and they tried, and the DA refused. The DA said, no, we're not, you can't call the FBI in. Because the DA didn't want the FBI in there. And the thing is, the police chief is the one who has to sign off on it. Police chief was basically in the DA's pocket. And I will get through all of this in the series as it develops. I'm not going to do them consecutively just so that the audience doesn't get fatigued. And honestly, because, you know, I need a break. Because for the past 2 weeks, I've done nothing but research JonBenet Ramsey.
Yeah,
and
it's not a light case.
No. I mean, I find, and what frustrates me is, you know, as I come across more and more, and, you know, I'm trying to correct some of the record on TikTok because there's a ton of misinformation going around TikTok right now based on just the documentary alone. It's just so hard because anytime you try and address one thing, somebody's like, well, what about this? And as I said to you a few days ago, it's not any individual piece of this case that points in any one direction. It is all of the circumstantial evidence brought into a sum total that points to something. And also what I'm finding, I think a part of the reason that this case has never been solved, quote unquote, is the fact that most of the evidence seems to be what wasn't found, who wasn't there, who didn't say what. I mean, so far, I mean, the first 48 hours thing is the one that's coming out this week. The night at the actual, like, first 6 hours is that first video. But what I wanted to kind of touch on with this one, aside from going into some of the problems with the Netflix documentary, because I haven't had time to really go through it and, you know, annotate. I mean, I want to go over that night because one of the first things that they said in the Netflix documentary, and this was how I knew that the Netflix documentary wasn't going to be hard hitting, that it wasn't going to be trying. And also, they've advertised it saying, like, you know, there was new groundbreaking evidence, which in my opinion is just their way of being able to ask for another DNA test. And what's really funny is that John, there was a Newsweek article quoting it, John said that he wants the DNA tested, like a reverse DNA test, to see if anybody with that DNA profile was living in Boulder at the time. I don't know what he means by that. The only thing I can think of is that he's thinking about the Boy in the Box case, which is funny to me, because in the Boy in the Box case, the parents killed him. So, you know, there might be a reason he was paying attention to that one. I'm not saying he did it. I'm just, when you look at the different theories, and I'll go through what those are in a second, but you can't do a reverse DNA test. You can't test DNA against people who haven't submitted it. So yeah, you can run the DNA again, and you can check it against, I can't remember the exact agency, but the same agency that detected not Sebastian. That's another kid whose parents probably killed him.
Zarelli.
Yeah, Zarelli, Joseph Augustus Zarelli. What they did was they had Joseph Augustus Zarelli's DNA profile in this international database. And yeah, the killer for this case should absolutely be sent into that. Should be sent into whatever databases there are, international, national, all of them. The DNA should be submitted. The problem is most of the DNA is incomplete. Most of the samples. There is, from what I understand, from what I'm getting swamped with on Reddit right now, there is apparently one strong sample that doesn't match any of the Ramseys, that doesn't match any of the Ramseys' friends, that doesn't match basically anybody who was tested. And it was found on the waistband and lower on the long johns, and I guess also matches DNA taken from one of the bloodstains that they have decided was saliva. So, from what I understand, that's the argument. I've been reading through James Kohler's book, and if I'm remembering correctly, he said it wasn't saliva. And that this also wasn't really a great sample. So I'm seeing conflicting information now. I'm seeing one side that's saying, yeah, it was a strong profile and it didn't match the Ramseys, and that was 2008. And then Kohler, in his book, which I think was 2012 or 2013, He's saying it wasn't a very strong sample. He also points out, and I think this is a major point, that there are, I think, 5 or 6 different DNA samples on that body that don't match each other.
You mean so essentially just 5 or 6 independent DNA samples that don't match anybody that were at the house or in the area, essentially?
Yeah, that's what I understand. Now, I've only read that chapter of the book once. Okay. I've read several of the chapters of that book literally 20 times. But, you know, I think people are missing the forest for the trees in a lot of ways with this case, because there's really 2 possibilities. Somebody in the Ramsey family did it. Somebody not in the Ramsey family did it. Both of those break into a bunch of other different ones. And I think with the Ramsey family, I'll get into the issues with that in a second, but with basically this breaks down into RDI and IDI are the terms people use. Ramsey's did it, intruder did it. In order for an intruder to have done this, they have to have broken into the house somehow. So they either broke a window to get in, that's the only thing it could have been, really. I mean, unless they picked a lock, but all of the doors in the house were locked. You can pick a lock. You can't unpick a lock.
Yeah. Or they would
have to actually lock it again. Or they had a key. Now, who had a key? We know of, I think, the Ramseys said there were 2 people who had a key. I think it was the housekeeper and the neighbor who watched the dog.
I thought also the mother did as well.
And the mom. Yeah, sorry. That's what I'm mixing things up. So the only 2 people the Ramseys said had a key the night of, or the morning of, were the mother, Patsy's mother, Nedra, and I get into some of the reasons why it didn't seem very likely it was Linda Hoffman Pugh. I
literally just edited that
this
part
Friday's
like 2
video.
hours ago.
Yeah. Which, you know, I'm going to be going in more depth to this because the way I'm structuring out this series is we're going to do chronological order of what was found. And then probably once we get to the grand jury indictment, after that, I will go back to the more typical Lore Lodge style, where it's somewhat chronological, but for the most part, it's here's the evidence, let's look at it. Because at that point, you know, if I were to do the chronology from June 1998 or whenever it was, August, 99, I think, was the grand jury indictment. I think 98 was the press conference that led to the grand jury indictment. So I'll probably stop there. Or I'll stop with, you know, the grand jury and how it turned out that, in fact, they did vote to indict. I think what they voted to indict on is also very interesting. So for those who don't know, a grand jury was eventually assembled in 1999. I think it was 1999. I might just be mixing up dates in my head, but it was after the presentation to the DA by the investigative team. And the investigative team, in their opinion, this was cut and dry. As far as the detectives were concerned, and this is the information they presented, it was Patsy. Now, I don't think it was Patsy, personally. And again, I'll get into that. Where my head is at currently right now, I don't think it was Patsy, or at least I don't think it was just Patsy. But what I wanted to get back to really quick was the IDI, the intruder did it theory. In order for that to be true, somebody has to have gotten into the house first. That person either had a key or they broke in. Can't have picked a lock because you can't unpick a lock. There were 4 people they eventually found out had keys. Linda Hoffman Pugh, Nedra Poff. I don't know how their last name is pronounced. I just realized that. P-A-U-G-H. Paw?
Yeah, I would say Paw.
Or it's almost Pew, but I don't think it would be that. Probably Paw.
Yeah.
So it's one of those 2. Nedra was definitely out of town that night. She was not. She was in Atlanta. She was not in Boulder. Linda lived in Fort Lupton, which is 45 minutes away. I believe they did eventually establish an alibi for her. I haven't gotten to it yet, but she does not strike me as the type, and her husband does not strike me as careful enough. You know?
Fair.
If you look at Linda Hoffman Pugh, she did not scoot her way through that basement window.
Yeah, it's not being mean. That's just being factual. I mean,
it's just the truth.
Yeah.
Now, could somebody have snuck their way in, gone upstairs, unlocked the door, and let her in? Yes, absolutely. Is there any evidence that happened? No. So she's probably out. Nedra's definitely out, because also I don't believe that she would have killed her granddaughter, especially after losing. Well, no, that wasn't her granddaughter. Sorry. John had already lost a child, but I don't think she would have killed her granddaughter. Suzanne Savage, who we're going to go into this a little bit in Friday's episode, she had a key. She had been not the housekeeper. She had been the nanny and had done some light housekeeping duties. But she hadn't worked for the family full time in over 2 years. and they didn't really find any reason to suspect her when investigating. Across the street, it turned out that I think the Brumfits, maybe it was, or the Barnhill. I think it was the Barnhills. They had somebody staying with them, renting a room. They had a key because they watched the dog. Now, one of the theories was, could it have been somebody in that family, or could it have been the boarder? Well, the Barnhills they were old, basically, is the only way to put this. They were not considered likely suspects. And the boarder, if I remember correctly, had the flu or pneumonia or something like that. So probably not going out committing crimes while laid up with the flu.
If it wasn't an act.
If it wasn't an act, but he had the flu for several days beforehand, and he had the flu for several days afterhand, like fever and everything. You can't really...
Yeah,
it's hard to fake.
Yeah, that would be a pretty intense, faked alibi.
Exactly.
If that was the goal.
And I do want to be clear. I am not saying... I don't mean to say that, like, everything I'm saying right now is definitively true. This is where I'm at in the research currently. And what I kind of want to lay out is, like, the police didn't drop the ball. They did drop the ball a little bit on the actual morning of, because they were confused, and they didn't have a homicide detective. The closest things they had were, like, narcotics.
Yep.
I mean, Steve Thomas was an undercover narcotics officer who got brought onto this case, pulled out of deep cover.
Well, it's also it's
not deep cover, but pulled out of cover.
It's also not a common occurrence for a kidnapping scenario to, within the first 24 hours,
turn into a homicide investigation.
Yeah, where the body is found within the home from which it was supposedly kidnapped. Like, it makes sense that certain things did not fall into place as they should have, but it's unfortunate.
Yeah. So, yeah, I keep getting ahead of myself, though. Anyway, where was I? Yeah, so for an intruder to get in, somebody has to get into the house first. Nobody with a key seemed likely. In fact, I think down the line, everybody with a key was verifiably cleared. Well, that means somebody has to have broken in. There were no signs of a break-in anywhere in the house except for a basement window that was under a grate. The grate had spider webs on it that were connected to the bricks that were undisturbed. The window had spider webs on it that were one corner connected to another. They were undisturbed. The broken panel, there was no glass on the inside. If the panel was broken from the outside, there would have been glass inside. Do I think an intruder in the pitch blackness is going to be able to clean up all of that glass? Especially when he left his flashlight upstairs on the counter? What, did he broke in, cleaned up the glass immediately with what bag? Where'd he put it? Where'd it go? And then did he break the glass, go upstairs, commit the crime, bring the mag light down, clean up the glass, and then leave the mag light on the counter?
Was the mag light...
Where's the glass? There's no glass. Did he bring the glass with him?
Was the mag light deemed to not have been the Ramseys?
No. I just don't want to get ahead of myself too much. I don't want to spoil too many things. But I mean, this gets fewer views than the normal content does. So, quick spoiler alert for the next 30 seconds or so. The Maglite brand heavy-duty flashlight that was found on the counter, that the Ramseys were like, I don't think that's mine. Well, as it turns out, multiple people who knew the Ramseys, including, I believe, both of their sons, in fact, John Andrew and Burke, if I'm not mistaken, as well as the Fernies, all said that's the Ramseys flashlight. I think John Andrew even gave it to them.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like in one of the documentaries that we watched, he affirmed, or it was affirmed, that he had given that to them as like a Christmas present the previous year or something.
And so here's part of the thing that's troubling. And again, this is getting ahead a little bit, but you would think, okay, well, there's one Maglite flashlight on the counter. If they own a second Maglite, if they own a Maglite flashlight and it's not this one, it's somewhere in the house. So you would think, oh, we'll check the house for it. A couple of days in to the search, into the investigation, Pam, Patsy's sister, well, for some reason, the DA decides she should be allowed to go into the active crime scene that is the home and grab a whole bunch of stuff for Patsy for the funeral. Now, listed amongst those things are a number of Patsy's clothes, including some things the police actually wanted to test against fibers found on the body. There were also John's golf clubs. He needed his golf clubs.
Because that makes sense.
For some reason. Just like... I don't remember the details of everything on the list, but I was reading through the list and I was like, oh my God, how did this happen? And what's frustrating is everyone wants to blame the police. They all want to say the police didn't do their job. But, you know, I am not typically a defender of the police. I still am, you know, pissed at the Ridley Police Department for not investigating that murder properly. But in this case, it's the DA. And I can't imagine, aside from the Ramseys being wealthy, I really don't get it. I mean, and to be honest, at first I'd said as much to you. My thinking was, oh well, you know, maybe people were being paid off. I don't even necessarily think that's it, especially not the cops. Like, you know, I'd said Sergeant Larry Mason and Detective Linda Arndt, they both developed amnesia down the line about specifically the morning of the events, as we've gotten into in this week's video without saying as much in the one that's coming out. Arndt and Mason did some things wrong that could have potentially come down on them down the line. They could have been scapegoated. So the best defense for them was to say, I really can't remember anything about that morning, even though they had both written and filed reports. So the best they could do is, you know, I don't remember, you're going to have to go by my report. Linda Arndt later went on TV and gave a pretty passionate interview about how she was sure John Ramsey was the culprit, but she also didn't look totally there. And according to Steve Thomas, she was like that in 1996 as well. Like, something about this case seems like it might have broken her a bit.
Yeah, I mean, can't say I would blame her.
Not surprised.
But on the point about the DA, I also think that it's not likely conspiratorial. I think it's more recognized incompetence of his own, where he was more motivated to not have to put in work where he might fail.
He knew he'd fail.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is like, and that's what surprises me about specifically what you were referring to about the grand jury. What was it? The verdict, essentially?
Yeah, the indictment.
Yeah, because the indictment that they gave, I can't remember the specific wording, but
it was basically putting a child in danger in a manner that resulted in the child's death. It was negligence resulting in death for all intents and purposes.
Which sounds like the smartest thing they could have done, because they probably recognize that you can't try this as murder because there's not enough evidence, but you can try that. A lot of the reasons why certain defenses or even just prosecutions will fail is because they charge the wrong crime when they don't have enough evidence for it, or they, you know, try and posture a specific defense when they don't have enough evidence for that defense. But a good attorney will recognize what the evidence they have and don't have, and then come up with an appropriate, you know, classification of legal action that will provide them a most likely victory.
And that's, you know, from what I understand, part of the responsibility of a grand jury is to determine not only if an indictment is appropriate, but what the indictment should be for. Not because a jury decides if you're guilty of what's being charged.
Yep.
The grand jury is, from my understanding, part of the process of deciding what the charge is going to be. In this case, that charge was short of murder, but I think it was really intelligent. What it did was basically say, because in my opinion, that indictment implies the grand jury felt that whoever did it was somebody who was in the house.
Yeah, or at the very least, that they were responsible for the fact that she was put in danger.
Now, it's possible that their verdict, that their decision was based upon their belief that by putting JonBenet into pageants, they were exposing her to pedophiles. I don't know if that's the case, because Alex Hunter refuses to release any notes from the grand jury process. What I also found very suspicious was the fact that the detectives weren't told that the grand jury produced an indictment. The detectives were told there wasn't enough evidence to indict. Or actually, realistically, the grand jury was told, we've decided not to indict. Or the detectives were told that the grand jury decided we were not to indict. It was only years later that it comes out that, oh no, the grand jury 100% voted to indict, and Alex Hunter decided not to. Keep in mind, Alex Hunter is, and this is again going to come out in this Friday's video, some of his DA staff were buddy-buddy with the Ramsey family attorney, Mike Bynum. So I think, there's all these people who want to come out and they want to say, well, the focus on the Ramseys is ridiculous and it's the police's fault and they shouldn't have been focusing on the Ramseys at all, blah, blah, blah. No, they should have been. That was absolutely the right thing to do. The Ramseys were by far, with nothing else known, when that body was found. And here, now we can bring ourselves back to where I wanted to be. When that body was found, the Ramseys were statistically, by a wide margin, the most likely perpetrators of the crime. I mean, it's like, I think the number was, it is 6% when a child is murdered. 6% of the time it's by a stranger. When it's in the home, that drops to almost nothing. And it's 54% when a child is killed, that it's the family. When it's in the home, that number rises considerably. So it was almost certain that whoever did this was somebody who knew the Ramseys very well, or who was a member of the Ramsey family. And another thing that I pointed out to you, one thing that bothers me is, the night this happens, that house is a labyrinth. It is confusing. Multiple people who knew the house well told the police, you'd have to know the house well to even find that room, to even know it's there. Because the basement stairs are like, I think if I understand this correctly, the basement stairs are basically right when you enter the house. You go down, come around, and then the room she was found in is through the door to your left, through yet another door into a room that is locked from the outside. It's not easy to get there.
Well, and also the fact that it's locked from the outside was in and of itself a big piece of evidence to indicate.
And on top of that, like, in order to get to JonBenet's room from... actually, can you pull up on Google the Ramsey family home floor plan?
Probably, but real quick, the fact that that door is locked from the inside...
Yeah, the fact the door is locked from the outside meant nobody could have gotten in and out from that door.
Exactly.
Because you have to place the mechanism back into place. And the mechanism was closed. So Aiden's going to try and pull up the Ramsey family home floor plan so that we can check on this. All right, there we go. The Denver Post one has all of them.
Okay, cool.
If it lets you read it. Yeah, so...
Did you make an account?
No, is it doing the thing?
Yep, but
they're on Reddit too.
I can just pull it up here.
No, they're on Reddit too.
Oh.
Like, there's a Reddit one right there. Yeah, there we go. So, if you can...
Yep, hang on.
Pop that up for people to see it. Just to really go over the other side of things too, because obviously somebody's got to break in. And there's just not a ton of evidence of that in my opinion. But the Ramsey family side did it. A lot of people will pick one member of the family and assume they did all of it. One thing that they will frequently do is acknowledge, okay, yeah, like the note was probably written by Patsy. That's one of the few things that I've yet to see somebody definitively provide an alternate explanation for. You know?
Yep.
So Patsy, it seems like, probably wrote the note. Does that mean Patsy killed JonBenet? Well, Steve Thomas seems to think so. He thinks that it was an issue of JonBenet wet the bed and it was late at night. Patsy was tired. She was irritated with this behavior. I mean, I do need to point out that bedwetting is sometimes a sign of abuse as well as incest. Abusive incest, I should say. So that should probably be considered. And when Linda Hoffman-Pugh started working there, JonBenet was wetting the bed every night for the first 6 months she worked there. And it had just resumed prior to her death, about a month. All right, so if you... Here, can I pop into your seat for a sec?
Sure.
Good look.
They're seeing a zoomed-in version of that.
Yeah, so this is the first floor. And if you take a look, you enter through the foyer, and you come into here. This is where JonBenet's body was initially placed when she was found. When she was found, she was brought up out of the basement and placed right here. Now, the basement stairs are right under there. So this right here is where the stairwell to get down to JonBenet, where JonBenet was found, is. in order to get to her bedroom, you have to go up these stairs. Sorry, I'm trying to... that wasn't what I meant to do, but that probably would have been nicer. Yeah, so... Here, sorry, trying to... This entire thing is so confusing. Yeah, there was an unidentified palm print on the wine cellar door, by the way. That was weird. But yeah, so it's the stairs down to the basement are somewhere in this general area. It's hard to figure out exactly where. But in order to get from here to JonBenet's room, which consider, in order to get up here, you have to come up out of the basement. So you come up out of the basement. You are right here. In order to get to JonBenet's room, you have to go past here, through the kitchen, around here, up this spiral staircase, and then you have to come over here into JonBenet's room. It is not like you're just walking up the first set of stairs. Now, if you take this set of stairs, you wind up with Burke's room right here to the left, John Andrews' room right here. You can walk through this way, through yet another room, through yet another set of doors, down another corridor, take another left, go through another set of doors, and you're in JonBenet's bedroom. Getting a small child's body down that spiral staircase was not deemed to be simple. In fact, it was deemed to be very unlikely. And if you want to carry her down the other staircase, that is risking quite a bit now, isn't it? So I mean, when I look at this, I don't see it as particularly likely that an intruder who did not know the layout of the house very well was responsible for what happened.
Yeah.
And that was basically the opinion of the investigators.
Yeah, all evidence points to some level of familiarity with the environment of the home.
Exactly. And what problem does that present, Aiden?
The problem presented by that is anybody who had access or familiarity with the home at the time
was ultimately cleared.
Yes. Other than, well, I guess technically, definitely cleared as the current body of proof stands, according to the vast majority of people involved with the case.
Yeah.
Externally.
Yeah. So there's not good evidence.
Well, I do have one question for you about the intruder theory that specifically the Netflix documentary brings up at the end.
Sure.
And that is specifically the John Mark Carr element.
I mean, it seemed pretty clear to me that it wasn't him. Like, even the Netflix documentary seemed to confirm that it wasn't him.
I don't know. To me, the Netflix documentary was heavily implying that he was supposed to be the guy.
It felt to me like it was heavily implying it, but also for the purpose of coming back around and being like, and even this guy who there was so much evidence for, it wasn't him. That's kind of how I felt about that one. I don't remember the specifics of the John Mark Carr part.
It was essentially that he was supposedly, I don't know if he was filling in, but he was teaching in the town or the area at the time. And, you know, he had been familiarized with JonBenet in some way.
Yeah.
And not long after, he ended up leaving town.
Well,
he ended up going
so
to, Thailand.
If I remember correctly, the reason they determined it wasn't him was the DNA. That it didn't match him at all.
I think
remember
you're right.
correctly. Yeah, that was towards the end of the documentary. By that time, I was a little bit checked out because I was pissed off. Yeah, that's the thing is, I don't even think that DNA necessarily solves the case. Because it's kind of a perfect setup, as we were discussing. If John Ramsey was in some way responsible, he knows his DNA isn't there. Because if it was there, he wouldn't be asking for DNA tests. He knows Patsy's DNA isn't there. And it seems likely that he somehow knows Burke's isn't.
Well, and that's the other thing.
But even if they are.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up. Is like, even if it is, it doesn't rule them out, but it also, by their argument, doesn't indict them either because they're family.
Yeah, because if they find, if their DNA is found on JonBenet, well, of course it was. You know, they lived with her. They dressed her. They fed her. Of course their DNA is on JonBenet. If it's not their DNA, well, that's the perpetrator. You need to find him. So there is no risk. Unless the DNA they find is in that blood, there's really no risk, you know, to the Ramseys, even if they did it. Again, I'm not sure the Ramseys did it. And oddly enough, the more I look at it, the more I do kind of understand where the really crazy conspiracy theories are coming from. like that they were basically pimping their daughter out. Because, again, very little about the night makes sense if it's not somebody who they know and that they let into the home. Another thing was some lights were on that weren't usually on. Some lights were off that weren't usually off. But to just walk through that night, because we're going to have to get super chats at some point. I don't know what time it is.
7:40.
Yeah. So to just walk through that night really quick, the Ramseys get home. It is, according to them, sometime after 10, and we get the very first lie told by one of the Ramseys right here. Because the morning of, when police come in and they start asking questions, John and Patsy both confirm, we got home, John read to both of the kids, and then he tucked JonBenet into bed, and then we went to bed. Later, the story is that JonBenet was asleep the whole time, that she was taken upstairs and put into bed, that Patsy tucked her in, and that John went downstairs to assemble a toy with Burke. One of these two statements, one of these two versions of the story is a lie. And I think that's important. You know, maybe it's my bias from the way I conducted the Sebastian Rogers case, but Lou Smith had some bias too from the way he conducted a case earlier. I think he wanted to prove that this was the same thing, that it wasn't the family, that it really was somebody else, and he wanted to show that wasn't a fluke. He could do it twice. You know, maybe it really was that he did think it was somebody other than the family. But when I look at this, what I'm looking for, because this is what I'm best at typically, I'm not a forensics analyst, I am not a DNA expert, I am not a law enforcement expert, but what I can do is read interviews. Just like Sebastian Rogers, just like that family, there are lies. It's not misremembering. There are lies told. And this is the first of them. I'm trying to remember what the other one was. The one, another one. This one was potentially not a lie, you know, potentially just a contradiction, accidental. Detective Arndt asks Patsy, you know, how'd you find the note? Well, Patsy tells Detective Arndt, I came downstairs, I found the note, I checked on JonBenet, and she wasn't there, so I went and got John, and that's how it all started. Well, earlier that morning, she had told Officer French, the first guy on the scene, I came downstairs, I checked on JonBenet, she wasn't in her room, I went down to the kitchen, I found the note, I ran upstairs and got John. Could be nothing. Could be she's frantic, she's traumatized, she doesn't know. Or it could be that she was making the story up and couldn't remember which order she gave it to Officer French in the first place. It's also relevant that she was wearing the same clothes she was wearing the night before. I think I actually neglected to even mention that in the video, which is my bad. But she was wearing the same clothes she'd worn to the party the night before. Her makeup was already done. Later on, they would go on to give interviews saying that John woke up at 5:30, that John was already awake, he was in the bathroom, he was shaving. This is the interview they tell later. Patsy says that she went downstairs at 5:45, immediately after she woke up. So there's no, I got ready and then I went down, at least if I'm remembering correctly. There's no, I woke up at, 5:45, I got dressed, I did my makeup, and then I went downstairs. No, she says that at about 5:45, she went downstairs. This was just after she woke up. She finds everything. When the police get there 11 minutes later, again, because she went downstairs at 5:45. John was already up before that. He was shaving. She didn't seem like she had gotten ready yet. The police get there 11 minutes later. I don't know a single woman in the world who takes only 11 minutes to get ready. Keeping in mind the fact that the note is supposedly found at 5:45. The police are called 7 minutes later. The Fernies and the Whites are then called 2 minutes after that. And Officer French arrives 2 minutes after that. I cannot fathom why the very first thing you would do after calling the police, after reading a ransom note that says, if you talk to so much as a stray dog, the girl dies, which, again, was, if I remember correctly, lifted right from a movie.
Yeah, I think it was, I can't remember which one they said specifically in the CBS documentary it was from, but it was. Yeah,
I mean, the CBS documentary, I think, made a very good point about that. That this was a Hollywood ransom note. This is not a ransom note written by somebody who writes ransom notes. This is a ransom note written by somebody who has seen ransom notes in movies.
Yeah. Well, they go over a variety of different points that,
There were multiple things that were lifted. I think one was Dirty Harry.
Yeah, one was Dirty Harry. One was something else. I think there was a movie like called Ransom or something. But the other thing is that they go
Ransom
over a
with Mel
variety of
Gibson.
different things.
John Andrew actually said to investigators, it's like somebody watched Ransom.
Yeah.
Like he was adamant, my family is almost a perfect match for the family in that movie. Another thing that's brought up in the books by the investigators, Patsy had a tendency to work things from movies and books that she had watched and read into her speech and writing patterns. She was the kind of person who, like, something would show up and it would get worked right into her personality. And here's the little nugget I haven't really harped on, but I will. Oh, I will. Patsy was a beauty pageant queen, right? She won Miss West Virginia. She won a number of lower level ones. She did not end up placing in Miss America. Her talent, however, was dramatic reading. Come on. I'm not saying that the Ramseys did it. I'm still not positive how I feel. But what I will say for certain is that the people who act like it's ridiculous to think they did are out of their damn minds. I have never seen a couple of people work so hard to look so guilty. They left town immediately. They tried to leave town that day. I mean, it defies every single norm about homicide in the book. This family, typically, in child murders, at the very least, the mother does not want to leave the body. Like, they've got to be dragged out of that house. Patsy, dressed and ready to go. John, 1:40 p.m., calling to, check to make sure that his plane's ready. That was the second time he'd called to make sure the plane was ready. Again, this is stuff we're going to go over on Friday in more detail, but he had called twice that day. He called Mike Archuleta twice that day to schedule that flight. The first time, he said JonBenet's missing. The second time, he said JonBenet's dead. Why did he call to schedule a flight to Atlanta, Georgia, before the body was found? Keep in mind, that means that it was before 1 p.m. So sometime between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m., John Ramsey called and said, hey, I need the plane ready for a flight to Georgia today. Yeah, and Archuleta was prepping it on the tarmac when he called.
Any normal father in that scenario would be calling to cancel a scheduled flight.
And the scheduled flight wasn't to Atlanta. He had a flight scheduled, but it was to Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And then he tells the cops, oh, I have a meeting I can't miss in Atlanta. Really?
I wonder what bag he was planning on bringing his things to Atlanta with.
I hadn't even really considered that one. Well, this was after the body was found. But yeah, that would actually make sense. If the first call is she's missing, there's no customs because you're flying within the country. There's no TSA because it's 1996. I mean, yeah.
Well, and plus he wouldn't need TSA if it was at a private airport for his private plane.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Because that was the thing that they harped on in the CBS documentary about the suitcase.
Yeah. Now, that said, I don't think her body was in the suitcase when Fleet White found it at 6:45 a.m. because he moved it.
Wait, when Fleet White found it?
Fleet White found the suitcase at 6:45 a.m.
Oh, yeah, no, it definitely wasn't in the suitcase at that point. But I think there may have been a goal or an attempt if we're assuming that the Ramseys were involved.
Yes. One other thing that I thought was really interesting, and I haven't clarified it as much as I'd like to, and it did look like it came from a tabloid, but it might have been in the CBS documentary, but I don't think it was. From what I understand, they asked Patsy to do a handwriting sample with her left hand, and the rumor is that it matched really well. That it matched almost perfectly.
From what I recall, that was not in the CBS documentary.
I don't think it was. Yeah.
But
so. And it's so frustrating. It's all so circumstantial. But the way I look at it, it is far less likely, in my opinion, that an intruder did this than somebody well known to the Ramsey family or in the Ramsey family. And I think that had it been somebody else they knew, I mean, here's the thing. They accused everybody they knew. And all of them got cleared. Every single one. And I mean, let's say it's Fleet White, one of the people they accused. Say it's Fleet White. His wife covered for him? Why? Why would your wife cover for you? I don't think if either of us committed a heinous crime, I don't think Amanda or Kat would, go to bat for us. They might refuse to testify, but that would be about it.
Depends on the crime.
Murdering a child?
Yeah, that one definitely not.
Exactly. Trespassing, tax evasion? Probably not. Yeah. But, like, murdering a child?
Yeah, I don't know how you could possibly stand by on that one.
Also, another really interesting thing that I keep seeing, either the CBS documentary pulled what Netflix did, and they did not, they left information out, or this is, not as concrete as a lot of people are claiming it is. There was something about saliva. There were some of the alleles that are found in saliva were found, not alleles, it was an enzyme or something like that, that's in saliva, but also several other bodily fluids and such, was, I guess, determined to be present on the blood stain. So they argued this could be saliva, in which case it's almost positive that there was a sexual assault that night. Aside from what could have been a staged sexual assault, which we'll get into because I have all the details from medical examiner's report. Anybody who is concerned with how I am covering this, and if I will just kind of take Steve Thomas and James Kohler at their word, there's a reason that it says based on the work of Steve Thomas, James Kohler, and other primary sources. I used other primary sources. One of those was the medical examiner's report. I have read it in full. I have presented the relevant details in this coming Friday's video. So where I'm standing on it right now, I see it as being most likely that this was one of the Ramseys. I think if it wasn't just one. I think the most likely course of events here is that Burke was downstairs eating pineapple and milk. I think he made himself a snack. JonBenet comes downstairs, somehow pisses off her brother, possibly takes a piece of his pineapple. We know that Burke was kind of antisocial. We know that his parents had books on childhood aggression. We know that there was a dictionary photograph that was open to the incest page, but that's neither here nor there. Again, going to get into all of this in the Friday videos with a lot more detail, a lot more clarity. And if I am wrong about anything, I will correct myself. Burke gets mad, hits her in the head with the flashlight. If I remember correctly, there is an interview with Burke later on where he says as much as, I would, snag that flashlight and use it to go downstairs to get late night snacks. So there's that. And again, I think I remember that being in one of the interviews. I might be mistaken. But I think that the way this goes down is Burke is downstairs eating a bowl of pineapple and milk. JonBenet comes down, pisses off her brother. Her brother hits her in the head with a Maglite flashlight. Realizes what he's done. Probably goes upstairs and gets his parents. John comes down, sees what's happened. Patsy comes down, sees what's happened. They're both frantic. They're both horrified. They don't know what to do. I think John realizes JonBenet is not going to wake up. It was probably pretty clear at that point. I mean, from what the doctor said, she was basically brain dead after that hit. John is then faced with a decision. If he takes JonBenet to the hospital, they are going to investigate this. It is the middle of the night. The only people home were the family. The police will be called. There's going to be an investigation. CPS will be involved. CBS will be involved later. CPS will be involved. The childhood protection unit at the hospital will be involved. And it will come back that it was Burke. Additionally, it's bad for business.
I was just going to bring that up. Yeah, considering
a CPS investigation is bad for business.
Well, yeah, considering his position at what was it, Asset Graphics?
Access Graphics, but they were a Lockheed Martin subsidiary.
Exactly, and considering that I think it was that year or the previous year that they had been valued at
that year they did over $1 billion in sales.
Yep.
So CPS investigation, because the CPS people, unless they straight up say it was our son, the CPS people are going to look at the dad. And honestly, they're probably going to look at the son no matter what.
Well, and
he's old enough.
Either way, though, they're still responsible. The parents, I mean, because of the age of both of them involved. It doesn't matter at that point who actually did it in the family.
This is all hypothetical, by the way.
Yes. Yeah. Hypothetical.
For legal reasons.
Yes. But at that point, essentially, if it was Burke in this scenario that is hypothetical that we're discussing, the parents would be the ones who would get the brunt of the law thrown at them, especially because of the detail that because Burke at that point was under the age of 10, he wasn't even
prosecuted.
Yeah, for anything.
Yep. So I think what you have there, and a lot of people are like, oh, well, John would never murder his own daughter. Well, if the alternative was bringing down a media circus that was going to paint him and his son as people who kill their child or their sister, and on top of that, he could face charges, and Burke potentially could face something. Who knows what? Maybe being taken away, put into the system. And JonBenet is not going to wake up, probably, even if they do take her to the hospital. I think that he does the thing he can do, which let's think about the way, and again, hypothetical. Let's think about the way that JonBenet is killed. She's hit in the head, blunt force. That's first. That was determined to have been first.
Can you elaborate slightly on why that was definitive?
It has to do with the petechial hemorrhaging in the neck from the ligature and all. I mean, it was the medical examiners came to the conclusion. The ME's report. If I'm just going to cite the expert on this one. The ME's report says it was asphyxiation by ligature strangulation in association with craniocerebral trauma. Either injury would have killed her. It's the strangulation that did it. Now, if you want to talk about, brain dead, yeah, the hit with the whatever it was killed her. But what ended her life was the garrote. Now, why do you use a garrote? There's a few possible reasons. One of them is because if you're wearing gloves, you've prevented yourself from getting, your hands on anything, from fingerprints, DNA, anything like that. But another reason that you might strangle somebody with something that's not your hands is because you need something else to kill them. Strangulation with your hands is a very personal thing. Killing somebody with your bare hands, that is deeply personal. That is something that is done out of rage. That is not something that is done out of mercy. The garrote could be considered merciful in this situation because when you look at the alternatives, there's not a ton of ways to kill somebody who's just been hit in the head when you can't let anybody know they were injured. Can't stab, can't shoot, can't slit. You can strangle. And here's the thing. A murderer, if the plan was to kidnap her, which again, there was a ransom note. You wouldn't write a ransom note if your plan was just to commit a murder. It doesn't make any sense. There is literally zero reason to do it. If you took the body, okay, got it. Now they think it was a kidnapping. They're looking for a kidnapper. They're not looking for a body. They're not looking for a murder. That's a different thing entirely. You might get away with it for a very long time. So I think the intention was, if there was a ransom note, the intention was to kidnap her. She dies in this manner. The being hit in the head, whatever, some accident happens, she dies. If I'm a kidnapper, I'm not going to spend, 15 minutes searching around for the proper supplies to craft a garrote and then doing it and then using it and then leaving it there. First of all, who leaves that kind of murder weapon? You can burn it. You can literally burn all of the evidence away with a match. It's wood and nylon.
Or also, if you're a kidnapper, you probably wouldn't wait to write the ransom note
until you got there?
Yeah, with materials from that home.
Yeah, in the mother's handwriting.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, which changed after this ransom note.
Yep.
Like her handwriting changed. It was different. It was decided. It wasn't like, a slow evolution. She stopped using manuscript A's entirely. Or maybe it might have been cursive. One of the two styles of A she stopped using. completely. They found, I think it was 5 examples of it in a letter written to her mother later. That was the only time she used the wrong A. So that's extreme. And again, this comes from Steve Thomas's book. It might have been James Kohler for that one. I can't remember totally. But that's suspicious as hell to me. But what I wanted to come back to with the strangulation, if somebody is non-responsive and they've just been hit in the head really hard, you don't need to craft a garrote. You don't need a cord. You don't need anything. You can just pinch the nose and put your hand over the mouth. She's 6, Aiden. Even if she was awake, she wouldn't be able to get out of it. She would die. Now, if you're wearing gloves, there's no worry about getting anything on there, right? Also, if this was supposed to be a kidnapping, it makes very little sense to sexually assault her after attempting to kidnap her for financial reasons, by the way. This was not a pedophilia thing. You very rarely see a kidnapping that is both sexual and financial in nature when the victim is a child. You just don't see that. If this was a kidnapper and he was just trying to put this child out of her misery, just like that. Hand over the mouth, fingers over the nose. It's done. It's over. There's no trace of it. I don't think a father could do that. I think a father might be able to use a garrote, but I don't think he could use his hands. I don't think that Burke is the one that strangled her. I think if Burke's involved, he hit her in the head with a flashlight. I also think it's very important to note that John and Patsy kept telling police that Burke doesn't know anything. Burke was asleep the whole time. Burke was in bed the entire night. They can't move away from that because the moment they do, they have to admit they don't know that Burke was asleep the whole night. They can't defend Burke in the hours they didn't know he was awake. And that bowl of pineapple that has Patsy's fingerprints and Burke's fingerprints, but none of JonBenet's, that, in my opinion, proves that Burke was up because she's adamant. And it's one of the few times she actually seems genuine. It seems like actual confusion, not theatrics. When they show her that bowl of pineapple, and she's like, I didn't make that. I didn't feed the kids pineapple. Like, that's impossible. I didn't do that. I would never have used a spoon that big in a bowl like that. And I think she's sincere.
Yep.
You know who would use a spoon that big? Somebody who doesn't care what size the spoon is, such as a child.
And her prints being on the bowl could very easily be explained by her being the one to have put the bowl away after it was washed.
Yep. Now, from what the housekeeper said, and from what the former nanny said, doesn't seem like Burke and JonBenet did a ton of cleaning up after themselves. They didn't really have chores because when you have a housekeeper, you don't typically give the kids chores.
Not generally, no.
You know, when in my family, you know, when I was younger, for my early life, we did not have help. Eventually, my stepdad started making enough money that we could hire somebody to come and clean the house. I stopped doing the things that person did. Those were taken over. Did I still do my own laundry? Yeah. Did I still clean my room? Yeah. Did that person start wiping windows and windowsills and doing the dishes and things like that? Yes. Can't say that's for everybody, but anecdotally, that was my experience having some help in the house. It wasn't that I still did all the same chores. I stopped doing the chores someone was being paid to do. And from, you know, the way the house was described, it wasn't like, you know, the Ramsey kids were frequently cleaning up after themselves. They weren't. They were not neat kids. That's just a fact. If that pineapple was not made, if that bowl of pineapple was not made by Patsy or John, it was made by Burke. And if it was made by Burke and pineapple was found in JonBenet's stomach, and a lot of people are like, well, it was a yellowish light green tan substance that may be pineapple. Okay. It's the only fruit she had. Some people are like, well, she had a fruit cocktail at the Whites that night. Not according to the Whites. They said they didn't feed pineapple. They said they didn't. They were like, no, we didn't feed her any melon. They said we didn't do that. So I don't see how it would be them either. No, I think that if this was a murder committed by one of the Ramseys, I think that Burke was downstairs having a snack. JonBenet came down, did something that pissed him off. And then I think that John strangled her, and I think that it would have been Patsy that wrote the note. The one thing I cannot really explain outside of it being staging, and I'm really trying to figure out who would have staged this, is the assault. Now, granted, it was not particularly deep. The furthest in that they could detect any damage was a centimeter. So, I mean, it's possible that it was staged, but I
have my own theory.
The other possibility is that Burke was doing that.
Yeah, I think that was the response. That was the reason for the bedwetting, personally.
I think,
hypothetically.
I do think that was the reason for the bedwetting. I don't necessarily think that... So here's what I'm hung up on. I don't think Patsy knew about the abuse.
I don't think either of them did.
But if... They said that injury probably happened very near the time of death, which was hours after Burke hit her, if he did. I don't see Burke as the one who used the garrote. I also don't see Burke as the one who put her down there with a blanket, with her favorite nightgown. You know, whoever staged the scene was capable of feeling love. And I don't think Burke is capable of that. Hypothetically, in my opinion. I mean, having watched the interviews with the kid, I mean, your sister died 15 days ago and you're laughing about it and like miming that you're playing Nintendo. I can't. I've lost 2 cousins who were close to me in age, you know, within 10 years. I don't laugh about it.
When I was
I'll occasionally laugh about my grandfather, who died at 84 after, you know, raising 7 children, who at least at the time all were still married to one another. Like, you know, like it was, like he raised a successful family. You know, he died with an intact family. He was able to leave thousands of dollars to each of his kids. He was able to, you know, because he was able to sell the home at a profit. He died surrounded by his children, with all of their children, their spouses, their children's girlfriends, and, you know, at that point, I think spouse as well in one case. No, not yet, but fiance. All of us were in one spot down the road. That man waited until 7 p.m. on Christmas to die to make sure everybody would be in one place. You know, like, I will sit there and I will laugh about that, because that man nailed it. He made it all the way through. He had just about the best life you could possibly live. You know, he built businesses. He was in the army. The guy lived the American dream, specifically the Italian American dream. He even owned a restaurant at one point. I can laugh about that because that's a happy way to go. Death comes for all of us at some point. We can only hope that's how it happens. We can only hope that is how it finds us. I personally, being, you know, a Christian as I am, I believe he was already up there. Probably several days before he died. I think he was already up there just going, wait, hold on, not yet. Okay, now. So that we would not be sad on Christmas. The fact that he died right after dinner, I swear to God, man, that dude he knew. He was up there waiting. He was like, I'm going to let him get through dinner, and I'm going to let him find out right before dessert, when everybody's together, so that they can all hug it out, and then they can, you know, eat their feelings with some sweets. There was a lot of crying that night. There was also a lot of laughing. When I think about the way that my cousin Dominic died, or the way my cousin Ross died, not even a sliver of happiness. Both of those young men died far too young for very tragic reasons. I mean, I can't comprehend finding anything about it funny at all. I still get sad when I think about it. I mean, I found out Dom was dead at my college orientation. The whole rest of the night, I was miserable. I was a wreck. I had to hide it Like, thank God I actually was at orientation because I was able to go up there and like put it away from my mind for a little bit and hang out with all these other college students. And still, I was like, damn, like, it was shock, you know? But 2 weeks later, I wasn't giggling. I wasn't laughing. I was at his funeral, you know? My cousin Ross, when he passed, it wasn't funny. There was no, you know, haha, remember when? There was a little bit at the funeral. Like, you know, oh man, I really miss when he used to, like that kind of thing. If Ainsley died, if it was a murder, I wouldn't be hopping on a plane to, you know, Michigan. The police would have to be restraining me.
I can tell you right now, I mean, for me, when I was about Burke's age, my aunt, who had been like a best friend to me for the year that she had moved back from Florida, I was over there at least once a month, more like a couple times a month. And she literally had become my best friend. It was all happiness, all like, you know, jovial, whatever. She died of cancer, and through her like final couple months, she did everything she could to make it fun for me.
So you'd have good memories of her.
So that I would have good memories of her. For minimum a year after that, I was in a severe depression, and like it made me. I used to pray every night, but it made me immediately lose all my faith in God.
Jeez.
And it was extremely traumatic for me, because it was like I watched at the time one of my best friends go from the most vivacious person I had ever seen to somebody who could barely function in a wheelchair, despite her actively trying to make it fun. I was a wreck. So, and that was an aunt who I considered a close friend at roughly his age. I can't imagine if I had a sister.
And from all accounts, the picture they presented in that Netflix documentary of JonBenet and Burke's relationship was just an utter lie. I mean, everybody I have come across describing the way those two children interacted has described it as neutral at best and antagonistic at worst. I mean, the former nanny, this is something we get into on Friday. The former nanny said that JonBenet used to break Burke's Legos. Like it had to be told not to. Like it was a problem. Burke had at one point hit JonBenet in the face with a, I guess like a wiffle ball version of a golf club.
Well, there's
like
also
a toy golf club.
There's also that detail about how many times did she go see the doctor?
Oh yeah, she went to the pediatrician 33 times in 3 years.
Was there ever a reason?
Oh, by the way, it was not considered necessary for the Ramseys to, like, the DA did not press for the Ramseys to be subpoenaed for Burke and JonBenet's medical records. Which, in my opinion, when somebody visits the hospital 33 times in 3 years and then is murdered inside of her home, I think those medical records might be relevant.
They might shed some light on some details.
They might. So, it's hard to say much more at this point with where we are in the research. I'm going to keep going through it. The one thing I will say is I feel like the DNA is almost a red herring at this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, the CBS documentary made a great point about the fact that it could have been in the manufacturing process. So
that's the thing, is if it was saliva found on one of those blood spots, that's hard to get around.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I'm not positive it was, because I'm seeing conflicting information on it. I also don't think it's out of the question that somebody could have been paid off. So that angle also has to be considered. That, there might have been some dishonesty here. I honestly think it's possible that John Mark Carr was paid to take the fall, basically. He ended up, he's not in prison. He's living a very covert life somewhere.
He was already doing that anyway.
Mm-hmm. He was in Thailand for a reason, So, I mean, the fact that he was calling this journalist, basically confessing, it all seems to perfect, you know? I just don't like it. I also got to look into Gary Oliva, but part of the process for this series is going to be going through, and, you know, I don't like those ideas that it was those guys. I'm still going to look at the evidence.
Well, yeah, because wasn't Gary's essentially like, whatever I need to do to have a shelter and 3 meals a day?
Yeah, at some point he basically apparently offered to take the fall for it, so long as he could make sure he was fed. Because, I mean, the way they describe him is they're like, you know, oh, he was like a vagrant and he was homeless. He was a homeless guy. Like, all the Netflix bullshit, you know, sensitivity language hides the fact of the matter. He was homeless. He was unemployed. He was hungry. Like, this is where that kind of sensitivity and that kind of language actually causes problems. You know, like, I get it. You don't want to define somebody by their circumstances, but in this case, it's very relevant information that he was homeless. Vagrant does not necessarily imply that you are, like, dirt broke. You can be a vagrant who has money. That's possible. He was a broke homeless guy who offered to take the fall for 3 square meals a day. And that's all he was, as far as I am aware. I mean, and here's the other thing. They talk about, you know, oh, well, he sent these letters to his friend admitting he did it. And he had called his friend admitting he did it. Where are the letters? If the police did not receive those letters, well, that's not evidence. If the police did receive the letters and they didn't convict the guy, then the letters probably didn't seem that legit. I would like to see the letters, personally. Again, this is stuff that I haven't gotten into because I'm still in the 90s. I am still in 1998, 1997 even. I'm going to look into Oliva. I'm going to look into John Mark Carr. I'm going to look into any of the other big-name suspects they came up with. But right now, I'm going to be very surprised if anybody seems good for this except for the Ramseys. So I guess we'll see how things go. But if you want to go to Super Chats, I think it's about time for that.
Yep.
Probably past. Just to give you guys an idea of what Aiden said to me while the mics were silent, we're going to be a bit more particular about which Super Chats we read due to the nature of the topic at hand.
Yep. Just want to be respectful.
If it's a little silly, we will read it to each other. We will see it, and we will be grateful. But we don't want to take away from the gravity of the conversation.
Yep. All right, let me take a look. I guess while I'm curating here,
sure.
You know, final thoughts on the intruder theory. Are there any details or questions that haven't yet been answered from what you've researched so far that you want to...
With the intruder theory?
Yeah. Because, I mean, obviously the Ramsey theory, you know, is a lot more comprehensive. There's still a lot of things that you have to kind of dig through. But from everything that you've looked at so far, are there any, you know, T's not crossed, I's not dotted that you feel are relevant
for the intruder theory?
For the intruder theory, yeah.
I mean, there not being any glass shards is big. There being no fingerprints on the ransom note is big. There being none of JonBenet's fingerprints on the pineapple bowl is big. There being no unidentified fingerprints on the pineapple bowl is big. The handwriting being assessed to basically either not exclude Patsy or incriminate Patsy is big. I can think of the only thing I can think about with the intruder theory that really points to an intruder is the DNA. Basically everything else suggests it was somebody who was already in the home. So I don't know. Apparently our sound was cutting out for a bit about 39 minutes ago.
Interesting. Levels look fine on Streamlabs. Anyway, so the The first question we have that is relevant to specifically the case at hand is from the Castman777 for $10. Thank you.
Thank you.
Saying, I've heard that JonBenet, the father or the grandfather, was affiliated with something called North Fox Island, which was a 70s version of the E-Man's Island. Do you know how true these claims are?
I have seen the claims. I have not looked into the possibility yet. It seems pretty far-fetched to me. I will look into it. I plan to look into it. But here's the thing. If it was something like that, why did it happen in the home? You know? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yep.
I would think that if it was going to be something along those lines, it would have happened elsewhere. Also, Patsy's reaction when she was told that there was evidence JonBenet had been assaulted was so visceral. I genuinely don't think she was aware. And I feel like it would be very hard for her to not be aware of that if that was what was going on. You know? So I will look into it. I'm not pretending it's impossible. But so far, I don't have any reason to believe that is what happened.
Understandable.
My eyesight's gotten bad.
So one question here from Elena de Howler Werewolf Queen for 99. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Says, given that 4 people had keys, could they have had their keys stolen or copied by someone who knew the house well, and that's how the supposed intruder got in?
At that point, you're getting into Occam's razor territory, where it's, okay, so somebody managed to copy a key. When, where, how? I mean, is it impossible? No. Are the keys that you typically see, yes. I mean, if it were going to be somebody who did that, I can't see it. I just can't see it happening. Because that entails you somehow know who has a key to the Ramsey home already. You managed to get that key without anybody finding out. You managed to copy that key without anybody finding out. There's a lot of steps here, and I don't see how it happens. Who knew? The one thing I can maybe see here is that the one angle I could see is that someone mentioned this stuff, basically sold the information and the key. So, I mean, one argument you could put forward is that Merv, when Linda wasn't aware, took the key, had it copied, and then sold it. He could have known about John's bonus because Linda might have mentioned it. That could be the origin of the $118,000 claim. He basically could have sold somebody the key and said, hey, break in, ask for $118,000. I know they have it liquid, all that. But it's a pretty sophisticated crime at that point for a guy who was drunk for his interview, which happened at like 2 p.m. on a weekday.
Yeah.
Granted, it was Christmas, but like, this is where them not seeming like sophisticated criminals comes in. The profile doesn't fit, you know?
Yeah, and profiling in this type of scenario
is very important.
Yeah, specifically like criminal profiling, like psychological profiling.
Yeah. Racial profiling, not so much.
No, not at all. The next one's from Miss Maury.
Although the racial profile here is white male, because they have that from the DNA.
Yeah, you know what? That actually came up in my mind earlier. I forgot to ask was whether or not the DNA would have had any indications of...
That was basically, from what I understand, that is basically the only thing that's not in contest about the DNA is that one of the samples was from a white male.
Oh, well, fair enough. It was Colorado in the 90s, so...
I would have been surprised if it wasn't a white male, considering the population of Boulder in 1996.
Miss Maury for $5 says, the ladies in chat would like to say that yes, we can get ready in less than 10 minutes, especially if you grab the clothes you wore the night before.
What kind of pageant queen, upper-class rich lady throws on the same clothes she had before for a flight. Patsy had multiple closets full of clothes and a full face of makeup.
Yeah, and I think that's a key.
And her hair was done.
I think it's a key detail to focus in on is that she was getting ready prior to supposedly knowing anything wrong or bad had happened.
And according to her, she found the whole note thing happened as soon as she woke up. She woke up, went downstairs, the note was there. She, from what I remember, did not at any point tell police, oh, I woke up, got ready, and then went downstairs.
Yep.
Also, it doesn't really make a ton of sense to me, to be honest. If she got up at... who gets up at 5:45 when you have to be at the airport at 5:30 or 6:30?
No white couple in history ever.
John... She said that she woke up at 5:45. Now, the flight was at like 6:15 or 6:30. One of the two. I can't remember which. That they were supposed to be getting on the plane.
Yeah.
Now, it was a private flight, so it's not like you're, the flight time is the time it leaves. Like, adamantly, 100% always. But the kids weren't awake yet.
Nobody was.
Yeah. And another thing that I now need to look for is if their suitcases were packed. Because in the video, in the crime scene video, I don't recall seeing a suitcase in JonBenet's room. But that would be... Yeah, like, and that doesn't make any sense. They have to have had their bags packed. Or maybe they were planning to just wear clothes they already had there.
That would be more likely.
That's the only thing I can really think of, is that they already had clothes at their cottage in Michigan and weren't bringing bags.
How long were they supposed to be there?
I think it was just for like a second Christmas kind of thing, so probably only a few days. So that was probably the plan, was that they weren't going to bring clothes. They were just going to wear the clothes they already had up there, which probably would have been winter clothes anyway. Because it's a cottage in Michigan.
Yeah.
So I guess that would make sense. But no, I mean, I find it very hard to believe that they were planning to get to the airport in 5 minutes. I don't think Patsy woke up at 5:45.
No, I also agree. But have you, by chance, mapped out the distance yet between their home and the airport they were supposed to have?
So that's things I haven't triangulated which airport they were going to. I don't think it would have been the Denver airport. I would guess it was a smaller airfield near Boulder.
You can have private aircraft at larger airports, but it wouldn't.
It doesn't make a ton of sense.
No, not at all. I will say also, Anthony Tiff for $5 says something we already covered, but just want to acknowledge it. Do you think that the parents and Burke were in on it, or just the parents? I'm torn between the two.
I would think if it was somebody in the home, it was everybody in the home.
Yeah,
it's kind of where I came out on it.
And then Elena,
there is a Boulder Municipal Airport. Hang on, how do we get to New Mexico from here? What the fuck?
Elena said, again, for $9, saying, just imagine how differently this case could have been if, 1, the cops had the experience to handle it properly, 2, there was no corruption, and 3, the crime scene was not contaminated.
Yeah. Whether the Ramseys intended to contaminate the crime scene or not, they repeatedly contaminated the crime scene. And they did it, like, in aggressive ways that would not allow the police time to say, hey, no, don't do that. Also, it's about 12 minutes today from the Ramseys' home to Boulder Municipal Airport. Which means that if she woke up at 5:45, she essentially had 20 minutes to get herself and the kids ready. Apparently, the plan was to have the kids fly in their pajamas so they could sleep on the plane.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically possible, but ambitious, assuming it was a 6- and 9-year-old.
Yeah.
Like, unless you were planning on essentially lifting them out of bed and keeping them sleeping in the car ride.
And I think that that's an important point, because if it's weird to lie about what time you woke up. So I kind of feel like in this situation, the timing she gave was a necessity, because if she was like, if she's calling at 5:52 and they're like, well, when did you find the body? And she's like, 3.
Yep.
They're going to be like, why did you wait 3 hours to call us?
Yeah.
Also, another thing that I think is relevant is that ransom note very directly says, do not call the cops. And John says that he read the ransom note and then told Patsy to call the cops. John had $118,000. There was no reason to commit to that risk.
Unless.
Like, what, they have surveillance in the home? Don't call the police. Call the non-emergency number. Call call your lawyer.
Or unless, hypothetically, in a possible otherworld scenario, the things that happened had already happened at that point, and calling the police while contradicting that directive that was in the ransom note ensures that what had already happened would come to be.
Yeah. Also, one thing that struck me was the beheaded thing.
Almost everything about that ransom note struck me in the sense of
true,
none of it makes any sense.
I've never seen an example of a ransom note that says that the person will be beheaded unless it came from like ISIS.
Or something from a movie.
Yeah, so why be that specific, And that was the thing the FBI people noticed. And one of the other things I saw is people are like, well, why didn't they get the FBI involved sooner? The FBI was there. The FBI was like, look at the parents. That's why the FBI wasn't called, because the DA knew the FBI was going to look at the parents. The chief knew the FBI was going to look at the parents. The problem that they had was that the police kept looking at the parents. So the DA did not want the parents to be responsible. The FBI was of the opinion the parents were probably responsible. And another thing, they're like, well, why wasn't the FBI involved in this and this and this? Throughout the course of the case, it was because the Ramsey attorneys kept insisting that they be allowed to be present for things that attorneys usually aren't allowed to be present for. Testing, for example. Because they were like, yeah, what the Ramsey attorneys are going to do, this was the opinion of the detectives. All of that what I've just said is the opinion of the detectives. It's their stuff that they said. What they said the Ramsey attorneys would do was take advantage of the jury's lack of familiarity with the terminology, with the procedures, with all of that, and then they would find things that happened during the procedure that could sound like they would make the results unreliable, and they would present those things to the jury. And the jury, not knowing better, and the prosecution being dog shit, because it was, it would never get there. And one thing you see over and over and over again is, you need to come to us with evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. You need to come to us with evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. But the prosecutor wasn't helping. He wasn't saying, like, at one point he finally goes, all right, in order for me to even bring this before a grand jury, I need you to present me with proof that Patsy wrote the note. And I think that the other thing was, God, it was like fingerprints or something like that. There was another key piece of evidence. And the police got both of it. And finally, they brought it to the grand jury, and then the grand jury voted to indict. I genuinely think Alex Hunter did not press charges solely because he knew he would fail on his own stuff. I mean, if you have everybody, keep in mind, there were other DAs there when all of this was presented. According to Thomas, they were all kind of like, yeah, it seems like it was probably the Ramseys. The FBI was like, yeah, it's probably the Ramseys. Every one of the detectives, except for Lou Smith, who, by the way, was not a detective for the Boulder Police Department. He was a private investigator, he was a sheriff's deputy or something like that. He was a sheriff something. He was paid to come in by the Boulder DA. He wasn't part of the Boulder Police Department. He was on the payroll of the guy telling the Boulder Police Department, no, I won't get you a warrant for their telephone records. No, I won't get you a warrant for their credit card purchases. I mean, if they'd had a warrant for the credit card purchases, then they would have actually known that Patsy Ramsey purchased precisely what Patsy Ramsey purchased at McGuckin's on a certain date for $2.29. I think it was December 3rd, 1996.
You got to wonder at that point.
By the way, is the same price point for the exact nylon cord that was found in the home.
Mm-hmm.
They went and bought it from the same McGuckin's. They found it. And had the DA not stood in the way of that, they would have had the security footage.
You have to wonder at this point, given all of these elements against the DA and also his track record even prior to this case coming around, if his behavior during the time frame of this entire case could be considered obstruction of justice.
I think it is. I mean, the detectives said as much. They were like, this borders on obstruction of justice. Conspiracy brain, something weird was going on in Boulder. And this guy was at the center of it. But he seems like he was such a moron that I cannot imagine him actually being the mastermind behind anything.
No, this very much feels like
Hanlon's
razor to me.
Though. Great politician.
Yeah.
He knew how to... Because here's the thing, when somebody's convicted of something, it makes the news. Plea deal doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as the news was concerned, there's no crime in Boulder. His entire tenure, there's such low crime in Boulder because nobody's ever convicted. Nobody ever goes to trial.
Mm-hmm.
I think he just didn't want a high-profile trial on his hands.
Yeah, because he was out of practice and debatably whether or not he was good to begin with. But yeah, I think Occam's razor in this scenario is Hanlon's razor. Is never attribute to malice what you can to stupidity or incompetence.
Yeah.
And I think this DA is a prime example of that.
Mm-hmm. Granted, there were some examples in Thomas's book of what he referred to as, he didn't refer to it as malicious, but it was malicious. But it was much smaller stuff. Like, he had an informant who worked for the Globe, the tabloid that kept publishing all of the leaks. According to Steve Thomas, this was his informant. The informant told him Alex Hunter was the one leaking all the information. It was the DA's office. Now, he gets a tape of this, and he's told to, from what I remember from the book, Chief Kobe is like, wait, so you're telling me that your informant is getting all of his info from Alex Hunter? It might have been Commander Eller I think it was Eller that authorized this. Commander John Eller, if I'm remembering this correctly, goes to Steve Thomas and says, hey, I hate to have you burn an informant, but we need you to burn an informant. We need you to record him telling you these things. And when he does, we will bring it to the chief and there'll be nothing else to say. The DA is leaking everything. According to Thomas, he got that recording. He goes in, it's presented to Kobe. Kobe has them destroy the only existing copy and takes the original for himself and says that he's going to hold on to it and he needs to speak with Alex. Now, obviously, because if this story is true, the only actual evidence was destroyed and Kobe has the only existing copy. From what I understand, Jeff Shapiro never came out and denied this, even after the book was published. I don't think Eller ever came out and denied it either. So that's significant. Seems to me that there is an argument to be made that the DA was basically profiting off of it, because what it seems like he did was he gave the tabloids information in exchange for the tabloids running interference for him.
Yeah, it just generally sounds like a few elected officials within the town of Boulder were really enjoying the fact that they were able to slyly make it seem as though there were very low crime rates and they wanted to keep it that way. And when a real, intense, and horrific crime that needed to be prosecuted came to their doorstep, none of them had the confidence or the integrity to see it through.
And I mean, honestly, one of the most obvious points here is the Ramsey attorneys had connections at the DA's office. Some of them had worked there. Come on. Come on. What's really disappointing is the guy that wrote Mindhunters was a consultant on this case and believes that he came to the conclusion it was an intruder.
Really?
Yeah. Granted, he did not have all of the evidence, and he was basically gone midway through 1997. So he wasn't actually there for a lot of it, but I just, come on, dude. There is so little evidence. Profile this intruder for me. John, Douglas, profile this intruder. Go ahead. Who is this person? Somebody who knows the Ramsey home well enough to navigate it in the dark? Knows the Ramsey home well enough to break in through a window that was already broken earlier? Really?
Get in and out of a doorway that was locked from the inside.
Mm-hmm.
From
the outside.
Well, from the outside of that room, the inside of the home.
Oh, yeah.
So in a way in which it would then have to be locked after you've gone through that door from the other side of the door that you've just gone through, and then getting in and out of that window that has no disturbance whatsoever on any of the spider.
Oh, did I mention that John lied about how many times he was in the basement that morning?
No.
Oh, yeah, he was in there before 10 a.m., and he revealed that in an interview with Steve Thomas years later, or months later. Haven't gotten to that part yet, so a little sneak peek for the live viewers. John Ramsey was in that basement more times that morning than he said. And according to him, when he saw the window, it was open. Isn't that interesting? Because you know what John didn't know at that time?
What's that?
That Fleet White had seen the window earlier and that it was closed. Fleet White goes down at 6:45 a.m. That window is closed and unlatched. It is broken. There is no glass. John Ramsey goes in there sometime after that and sometime before 10 a.m. according to him. Again, this is an interview he did with Steve Thomas, I think in April of 1997. Well, before 10 a.m., he went down there, and he saw the window was open and unlatched. Interesting. Because what does that imply, Aiden?
That implies that Fleet opened the window.
No, Fleet said very clearly that he left the window closed and unlatched.
See, that was a detail you didn't give right there.
Yeah. He found the window open, closed and unlatched. John Ramsey, supposedly, sometime before 10 a.m., found it open and unlatched.
Yeah, if
what does that imply, Aiden? If it wasn't Fleet and it wasn't John,
that if it wasn't either of them, then someone would have had to have come into the home between those two times somehow.
Or the intruder was in the home the whole time and they somehow missed that. Keep in mind, Fleet White opened the door to the wine cellar. Nobody jumped out at him. Nobody hit him. Nobody tried to hide where he was. Somebody just sat there in the wine cellar with the body the whole time.
Wasn't the house like generally surrounded by cops at that point?
Yeah.
So
a lot of people in there.
Wouldn't have someone have seen someone exit?
Oh yeah.
Home.
If somebody exited the home around, sometime before 10 a.m., they would have been spotted. So, why did John Ramsey lie? I mean, he definitely lied. I mean, he lied by omission by not saying how many times he was in the basement, from what I can tell. If Kohler and Thomas are not completely making this up, John Ramsey lied about how many times he was in the basement. He completely left out a major detail. There's also something in there about a chair that was in front of the door that he supposedly had to move, that it would have been basically impossible to place the chair in that position from inside the room. So if this is one thing I came across when I first started reading. The story that apparently was told was John said that in order to get into the room, if I remember correctly, he had to move a metal chair. There's a picture of this chair, by the way. That chair was basically under the doorknob. In order to move the chair there, you basically have to be on that side of the door. And yet, in order for the intruder to have left through that window, as John suggested when he said that he moved the chair out of the way, opened the door to the train room, walked in, and saw the window open. So between 6:45 a.m. and sometime before 10 a.m., the intruder, who was still in the basement the entire time, somehow managed to get back into the train room and close the door in such a way that there was a chair sitting directly under the doorknob on the outside. climb up back through the window, not disturb any of the spider webs, not disturb any of the foliage, gets out, and then somehow sneaks past all the police.
And then let me clarify this one more time. So that time that John did not...
just really quickly, for all the people who are considering the possibility it was Fleet White, Fleet White was totally cleared. Did not match anything. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing.
Well, that was the other thing I wanted to check, was the time that John successfully omitted, about entering the room. Was that within the new timeline before or after Fleet White checked it out?
That was after.
Was the chair there when Fleet White checked out the room?
Fleet White did not mention a chair.
Odd that he would have entered the room that supposedly had a chair under the knob and wouldn't have acknowledged that a weirdly placed chair that almost seems like it's trying to block the door
was there. Yeah. Strange, isn't it?
A little bit.
You know, again, maybe I'm just misremembering details. But if I'm not, they're weird details. So this is all stuff that's going to come up in probably the next video.
Well, and
the next video is going to be going through a lot of the interviews.
This all kind of culminates in your point from the beginning of the episode, which is if you're hyper-focusing on a few of the details, you, to use your own words, are missing the forest for the trees. You have to take all of these things together. And when you distill them down into one scenario, what is that most likely scenario?
Because it's the most likely one does not seem to be an intruder.
No.
No. And yeah, this is kind of thing is like with the Ramsey did it theory, the only thing that needs to be overcome is the DNA. With the intruder did it theory, the only thing that they have is the DNA. You know the meme about, like, it's usually used for vaccines, where it's like, well, we have one study that says you're right and a stack of studies that says you're wrong. That's how I feel about these two theories. I think a lot of people get, caught up in the finer details and don't really realize how the majority of the details point in one direction. And you've only really got to explain a few things in order to get there. The two things that stick out for me when it comes to it not being a member of the Ramsey family are the abuse to the no-no square, as you might say, for YouTube's sake, and the DNA. Those are the only two things that point to it not being a member of the Ramsey family. I'm not confident it was an intruder. We'll see. I've got 2 more parts of this to research and write, at least.
I will say this is not something that I had previously thought of, but it is something that I think is relevant now that I've thought of it. Given the bedwetting, the doctor visits, the age and the implications of that all existing, there is a non-zero chance that if there is foreign DNA, it may have been from that night at the party. Because if the kids were on their own at any point, I don't know how many kids were at that party. I don't know what the scenario is.
At least the Whites, and the Whites had at least 2, Fleet Jr. and Daphne, who were similar in age to Burke and JonBenet, respectively.
Whether or not the implication is that it was Burke at any point, that does not rule out the possibility that it was or was not someone else.
True. But from what I understand, they tested all the Ramsey's friends.
But did they test the kids?
Well, that it would be familial then. Like if you had markers, if you tested a parent and it was one of their kids, you'd have a match.
You would have a partial, and considering the DNA was partial
to
begin with,
match.
Yeah, but again,
yeah, I mean, it's possible. And back then, I mean, you might have to retest
Because that's the thing is, like, because the DNA in and of itself was incomplete to begin with.
That might be an interesting exercise for the Boulder PD to go in with. Basically be like, hey, now that we have a better sample, we need to retest everybody who saw JonBenet that night. And then anybody who balks might be somebody to look at. Because if it's Fleet that balks, well, then you got to consider it might be him or it might be Fleet Jr.
That's the thing is, that's not necessarily saying that they are responsible for the murder.
Yeah, but
that might explain the DNA.
Yeah. I could see it. I think you'd need to run more tests.
Yeah.
You need to retest all of those people because the testing they did was at the time.
Yeah.
Now, lately, they've just been testing against the existing database. Also, I keep seeing people say they need to put it into CODIS, and I think they did. I don't know. Like, I read an article that said they did that. So it's not a big database. It's only like 1.6 million people. But who knows? What else we got? Also, really quickly, just because it's one thing that I have seen a whole bunch of times, handwriting analysis is not debunked pseudoscience. Handwriting analysis to determine somebody's personality, like psychoanalysis based off of handwriting, that is shaky. Matching handwriting samples is not shaky. It's actually almost like fingerprinting. Unless somebody is deliberately trying to not write like themselves, handwriting doesn't change much. It evolves over the years, but it doesn't change aggressively. You can match people's handwriting. That's how they caught Ted Kaczynski. Was they looked at the language used and they looked at handwriting samples. Because I think the memo, I think the what is the word? The manifesto. His manifesto, if I remember, was printed, right?
I think so.
But he had handwritten stuff as well that they were able to test against. But it was a turn of phrase he used, I think, that ended up catching him. Oh, by the way, the guy who looked at the handwriting and determined it was most likely Patsy, that was the same guy who worked on the Unabomber case. It wasn't some quack. Everybody's like, oh, well, he wasn't in law enforcement. Well, they consulted him on the Unabomber case, so...
And he was effective.
Yeah, I mean, he was something like 152-0 when it came to this. Like, he was never wrong.
Yeah.
And later in life, he got sued for defamation or something. I don't know if it was by the Ramseys, though. I see there's a verified in there. Who's that?
1 second, let me scroll
up. On
up.
the right side.
This one here? Glue, Guns, and Roses.
Oh, what'd they say?
There's been a number of chats.
It's not every day we get somebody in the 100K club.
Yeah, there have been a number of chats, but the one most recently is that handwriting samples is a real science, but it is debated between professionals, just like doctors will disagree on if JonBenet was hit in the head right before death or hours before.
Exactly.
I will say,
I believe the consensus by the doctor from CHOP here in Philly, who was shown the DNA, or not the DNA, who was shown the autopsy evidence, was that it was 45 minutes to 2 hours before death.
Yeah.
Based on forget exactly if it was something about tissue necrosis and the amount of bleeding or something like that. I can't remember the exact details, but I will get into that. I didn't cover it in this upcoming Friday's video because I'm trying to go in chronological order with those.
Yep.
Which has been brutal. Nobody did this in chronological order. Everybody did it in vaguely chronological order, and now I've got to be like, okay, so this happened, and then this happened, and then, oh, well, these two people say these things happened at different times. Also, I will say I've been trying to read the Ramsey side of the story. They did not make their book accessible in the modern era. I had to order it from an actual bookstore through Amazon, which, thank God Amazon started off as a book-selling website. That's a thing, by the way. Our Amazon password for the longest time when I was a kid was our books, because that's what Amazon was 20 years ago. So, anyway, I had to order it from an actual bookstore. It will not get here until the 6th. I ordered it last week. I have not been able to read the Ramsey side of this yet. I've only been able to read a few excerpts in which they say things that aren't true. Or that are at the very least debated, and they state them as if they're facts, which bothers the hell out of me. So, what else we got? I noticed you scrolled past a lot of them. Were there that many that were...
Yes.
Wow.
A couple that like are worth going back to, potentially. There's not on topic, and they're a little deep.
All right. Gotcha.
But, yeah, most of them were not...
Even readable for this?
Some of them were, but
all right, once we finish off with the actual relevant ones, let's go through the readable ones, and then I'll just look disappointedly into the camera at the rest of you. And gratefully. I am gratefully disappointed.
And we'll...
Particularly in you, Gomb. I haven't seen what you sent yet, I just know. Am I right?
Yeah, 100%. Okay. Also, we'll go over the ones that are genuine and good, and I mean, they're all good, but the ones that are readable... that just weren't directly relevant. We'll prioritize those afterwards. Her Royal Pain for $5 says 33 trips to the doctor would constitute a CPS call to the house, would it not?
You'd think the doctor did not ever report it. Oh, he was also a family friend, by the way.
Yeah, of course. So I guess if we're going to do kind of like here and there. So Alex was asking if you could give him a short excerpt on your Boy in the Box case so he can clip it for his project. Also, how do you deal with lazy project partners in, like, I guess, high school or college, whatever?
I just did all of the work myself, and then would tell the teacher I did all of the work myself. So, depended on how lazy the project partners were. But yeah, if I had to do an entire project myself, I was the kind of person who would go and tell the teacher, hey, I did this entire thing myself. Because in terms of grading, it wasn't even about ratting on anybody. It was a project that was completed by 4 people is going to be graded more harshly than a project completed by 1. So I would tell my teacher, hey, I'm not trying to be a rat, but for grading purposes, I did almost all the work on this. Please go easy on me. You know, this was supposed to be done by 4 people. I did it myself. So that's what I would recommend.
Would it usually work out for you?
Yeah. It didn't happen that frequently. This is like 3 or 4 times across the entirety of 12 years of school. Most of my project partners were pretty good in school, in classes. As for the Boy in the Box thing, I would recommend watching the full video that we have. It's only, I think, 39 minutes long. Something like that. It's from when our videos typically were only 20 minutes. So it's one of our longer ones, but it's also not one of the really long ones. What I will say, kind of just to give you the short little blurb about it, back in, I want to say it was 1957, right?
For which things?
Boy in the Box.
Yeah, I think that was about it.
I want to say it was either 1954 or 1957. I can't remember which it was, but I think it was 1957. A boy named Joseph Augustus Zarelli was, unfortunately, he was murdered in Philadelphia. He was not named until, I think, 2020, that they finally figured out who this kid was. And then in 2021, they were able to use a international cold case DNA database. Basically, the people who run this database got a notification. Somebody had submitted an Ancestry or a 23andMe, something like that. And it dinged for Joseph Augustus Zarelli, for this kid. It turned out that it was his, I think it was his second cousin twice removed that had done the sample. So they asked that guy to get his mother a test kit, where they sent him a test kit and had him ask his mother to be tested. As it turned out, I think it was like her uncle who was Joseph's father, like Augustus Zarelli, if I remember correctly. Part of the reason this is confusing is I'm pretty sure one of the uncles was Joseph and one of the uncles was Augustus.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, so when I looked at it, I was like, I don't know which uncle this would have been. I got a call from a private detective agency, like the Vidocq Society, that's based out of Philadelphia. There's, I think, 84 of them. They have one detective for every year that the guy it's named after lived. Kind of a cool little, like, weird thing in Philadelphia that we have is just this shadowy detective agency that helps police departments all over the world.
It sounds
sick.
Yeah, it sounds like
it sounds fake, is what it's.
Yeah, it sounds like the premise of a series of detective novels.
Exactly. So, Anyway, they actually got a call from the detective who's assigned to that case from the Vinex Society. She said, right church, wrong pew. I had the right family. I had the wrong dad. I think that's what she meant. So I will say that felt good. That one felt good. But yeah, the basics of it is, Joseph was very young. I think he was like 4 years old. They found him in a cardboard box on the side of the road in Fox Chase, which is a neighborhood in northern Philadelphia, I should say. They were unable to identify him for years because there were no missing children reported. They could not line him up with anybody that they had in their database. Fingerprinting existed, but they didn't have any records of his prints. So for years, he was just this John Doe, referred to as the boy in the box or Philadelphia's unnamed child, things like that. 1998 DNA analysis is becoming a thing. This is around the same time as JonBenet. So 1998, they get the idea to retest his DNA. They do. And they find some markers, but doesn't turn anything up. That's how the DNA gets into the system. They have this woman named Martha who comes forward, and she's referred to as Martha, Mary, a bunch of different M names. I was able to confirm. I'm pretty sure it was Martha. I found the exact woman. She died in 2020. Like I found her. It was her. I found her in a yearbook. I found her parents in the yearbook that proved that they were the people she said they were, and that they lived in the place they said they did. And, she had her story about everything that happened. She said that the boy in the box was just, basically somebody that her parents had adopted, but this was the 1950s. He was sold, so it wasn't an official adoption. He was horribly abused by the mother. Her father apparently horribly abused her. This was something they did together. When I say doing the boy in the box case is part of the reason I am as desensitized now as I am, I mean it. That was... You filmed it.
Oh, and trust me.
You saw how hard it was.
Not only that, but you do all the research, but also I listened to each of these videos minimum of 4 times. So I heard that over and over again that week. And then, obviously subsequently whenever we talk about it, along with every other case that we do. And, I also do... You provide all of the written sources.
You get nice videos.
I have to go get the videos and the images and then source all of those.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's safe to say that at this point, we both have been thoroughly desensitized to this kind of stuff for a variety of reasons.
If people were to hear us talk about these things the way we do to each other, they would probably think that we're monsters, but it's just because we see it so often. It's just every week.
I am by no means a soldier. I have never been to war, anything remotely similar to that, but I understand the dark humor that they get criticized for.
You see where it starts to come in because, and sometimes it bleeds through into the videos where I'll make a joke that people are like, are you really joking at a time like this? And I'm like, trust me, I had to. Because if I don't find a way to find some levity in these things, I will be horribly depressed.
Yeah, most of the stuff we talk about is so dark that you need to be your own source of light somehow.
Yeah, so... But so Joseph, it eventually comes out that he is who he is. It's a case that's never going to be solved. I mean, it could be solved, but it's never going to be prosecuted because the people that killed him are long dead. Their only child, as far as I'm aware, is also dead and didn't leave any children of her own. And then the Zarelli family, that was part of the reason that the police held off on releasing a lot of information. It's actually part of the reason that you and I held off on releasing information. And then the Philadelphia Inquirer stole our entire flow, or bar for bar, word for word, whatever it is, and just printed it. And we're like, Philadelphia Inquirer journalists with the help of internet sleuths. That was us.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. I'm fine with never getting credit for anything that we've managed to actually put more eyeballs on.
It's just the fact that I
can't say for certain that I can't say for certain that the reason the FBI put out a $50,000 reward for information leading to the recovery of Sebastian Rogers 3 weeks after we put out our video. I can't say that was us.
Well, also,
but it seems a little weird. Oh yeah, I did send them all of the files I had. Sent that to them, the TBI. And that's crazy. A few weeks later, they're like, you know what? Maybe this was the parents.
Well, and it's also the shocking thing about the Philadelphia Inquirer thing is considering we're in their backyard and we have been born and raised here.
I'm mad. I'm still mad about it. I'm always going to be mad about it. Anyway, we have more questions, and I would like to sleep tonight.
As would I. With Sewer for $10 says, thoughts on this. Intruder gets in, kills JonBenet Ramsey, leaves. Burke finds the body. The parents find Burke finding the body, draw exactly the wrong conclusion, and try to protect him by covering it up.
Still faces most of the same problems with the intruder theory.
Also, the biggest problem I find there is the timeline.
Yeah, it would have had to happen weirdly fast. And also, like, yeah, because when would it have happened? Another thing that bothers me, you know, it's not necessarily as relevant, but John, in one of the interviews later on, says that he heard Patsy scream from downstairs. And it struck the Fernies as odd, about a week after all of this happened, that John could hear Patsy screaming from downstairs, but Burke couldn't. So, you know, a woman across the street, Mary something Stanton, M something Stanton, told police a few days after it all happened, after originally saying she didn't hear anything, she didn't know of anything because she didn't want to be involved, came forward and did tell police that she thought she heard a child scream in the middle of the night.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah. I believe she was one of the neighbors, yeah.
Next is from Glue Guns and Roses for $10 in reference specifically to Patsy being dressed. Saying, the kind of rich white lady who only wears dry-cleaned clothes that don't go in the hamper and won't be seen in pajamas. They were taking their own plane that was packed the night before.
Gotcha, yeah.
So, which, I don't...
Plane being packed the night before makes sense.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if that detail can be confirmed elsewhere. If you're aware of where that could be confirmed, I think that'd be beneficial for us to have if you'd be willing to let us know. But yeah, that's a worth knowing detail.
Yeah. But yeah, I think what's really worth knowing is Patsy was the kind of woman who wouldn't be seen anywhere in the same outfit 2 days in a row. Full face of makeup, hair done, got up 15 minutes before the police got there. Not even 11 minutes before the police got there, according to her. Because unless I am seriously misremembering, she did not mention getting ready before she went downstairs. So...
Elena for $9 says, if one DNA was a white male, do we know the profile of any of the other samples? Are they also white males or are they different?
I believe they found up to 6 potential profiles. One of which was, there were at least two different males. One possible female. All of them unidentified. So this is part of the point that Kohler makes in his book that I want to get into, regarding why the DNA doesn't necessarily support an intruder. If I'm remembering correctly, Kohler said that there were at least 5, potentially 6 different partial DNA samples found on the body. So if you're going to say that DNA is relevant here, that's potentially 6 intruders. What? So there is going to be a follow-up to this live once I finish. I mean, there will be another live where we go through it and we're like, okay, so here's all the stuff that we've learned, and where we give a final opinion, obviously. But right now, I mean, I'm having a really hard time. I'm having a really hard time seeing how this wasn't somebody in the family.
No, I hear you. Isabel for $5 says, the evidence, the witnesses are unreliable. I think if it was a parent, the parents would have turned on each other. They would protect the son.
They would protect the son.
Yeah. Which it lines up essentially with almost all of the evidence that we currently have, hypothetically.
Yeah. So I think, good point. If it were either of the parents, they would have turned on each other. That was one of the things I said to you on the phone, I think. recently, or I might have been talking to Amanda in our living room. But I remember saying, one thing I can't square is, if one of the parents did it and the other knew. It was when I was trying to figure out, if it were Patsy or John. I was like, I just can't see how if one of the parents knew it happened, the other wouldn't rat on them. So I think the only way it makes sense is if it was Burke.
Well, for the details, Burke, Patsy, John, what were all of their roles?
So in my opinion, if it were somebody inside the house, it would have been Burke hit her in the head, John strangled her to put her out of her misery, and Patsy wrote the note.
And the assumption here is that Burke wasn't necessarily attempting to kill her.
Yeah.
It was just an angry 9-year-old sibling hitting their sibling with something over the head, not realizing the severity that would inevitably cause. Hypothetically. Landon Harrison for 199 is asking, did either of you ever consider law school?
Considered it. I was advised not to do it.
Why?
Too many lawyers. Very saturated. Mostly just reading. It was suggested to not be a really great thing. Also, if you see channel member chats in there, let's definitely read those.
Yeah, we'll do. Yeah, I figured we would cover those after the relevant ones specifically. Hang on. I considered it only after watching like Boston Legal and other shows like that where they would do the really baller closing arguments because I always thought they were really compelling. It was always interesting of an idea to me, but at the end of the day, not interesting enough to pursue as a career.
Yeah.
Elena is saying we need to retest all the DNA against everybody.
Yeah. That's the thing, is if they're going to retest the DNA, they need to retest the DNA against everyone.
Yep.
Like, it can't just be, CODIS.
Yeah. Squintin for 499 is saying, were any of the friends' kids adopted?
Not that I'm aware of.
But I get where you're coming from with the possibility that would then...
I could see where it could have been coming from.
Yep. Elena gave us $10 for the PTSD therapy fund for us. Appreciate it. And then Vice Forever for $5. What?
Somebody brought up the Steve Thomas depositions and gave the full written versions of them. Somebody who I know on Reddit thinks that it was not the Ramseys. So I'm curious. Like some of the stuff in here is, the difference between saying somebody is arrested for the crime and saying somebody has been found guilty of a crime. You know that difference, don't you, sir? Yes, it's a big difference, isn't it? Sometimes is and sometimes isn't. You don't think there's a big difference between someone being arrested for a crime and someone being found guilty of a crime? Then somebody... So, by the way, I think something that needs to be mentioned here is the attorney for the Ramseys was L. Lynn Wood, who is the same guy that spent a year saying he had proof that the 2020 election was stolen and had none at any point. That's not a comment on the 2020 election. That's a comment on L. Lynn Wood and the fact that he is, like, not a reliable person and should be considered... He should be eyed with a lot of suspicion. Anything he's involved in. Do you know the difference here between someone being arrested for a crime and someone being found guilty of a crime? Do you understand that? Thomas said, I've often arrested people who were guilty of a crime were subsequently convicted of a crime. And you've probably arrested a lot of people who are not guilty of a crime. Didn't you? I doubt it. You don't think that happens on a frequent basis? That police officers, or who are you talking about, me, Mr. Wood? Police officers in general, I won't go back into your background at this moment on that. That innocent people are sometimes arrested, that people are arrested for a crime and ultimately not found guilty of that crime. I don't have the statistics in front of me. I don't know. But you don't fight the idea that it happens, sir, do you? He goes, I think. He gets cut off. Surely you don't think anybody that is arrested is actually found guilty, I hope. Wait, what? Surely you don't think anybody that is arrested is actually found guilty, I hope. So they're, at this point in the deposition, just trying to make him look stupid by asking him weird, confusing questions that can't really be answered.
Yeah.
Because he already said, yes, I understand the difference. And now they're asking him, like, his personal opinion about the cases he's worked on. And this is why, this is, I think, the problem, is a lot of the people who read this stuff don't put themselves into Steve Thomas's shoes. He's giving a deposition because he's being sued. He's going to deliberately avoid giving any answers that make it easier to sue him.
Yeah. I love reading these things specifically because I very much enjoy the people who, in those scenarios, know exactly what's happening to them.
Yeah.
So for that like last question that you said was asked,
Mm-hmm.
the dream scenario in my mind would be that the person on the stand would say to the prosecutor or the defendant or whoever
Yes,
it was,
I've arrested people who were found innocent.
or specifically to that that last question would be like, I'm sorry, sir, are you confused? You just contradicted the last question you asked me.
Yeah. So they get to the end, he goes, Linwood asks, you don't fight the general concept, sir, an idea that people are arrested for crimes that ultimately they are found not guilty of committing. I want to reread that.
Mm-hmm.
You don't fight the general concept, sir, an idea that people are arrested for crimes that ultimately they are found not guilty of committing.
Yeah, it's intentionally verbose.
Intentionally verbose. And the response from Steve Thomas is, there is a difference between there is a difference between being found not guilty at trial and being innocent, Mr. Wood.
Cold.
Yeah.
Cold response.
And then another attorney asks, it's the difference between being not found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, even where there may be probable cause to arrest. There is a difference, isn't there, sir?
He didn't provide two scenarios.
Yeah, and then Thomas goes, I don't understand your question. And this is being presented in order to make Steve Thomas look stupid, when in reality, if you're reading this from a position of, like, experience with these kinds of things,
or just from the position of being in the chair,
he was asking confusing questions. These questions are worded in a way that is lawyer speak.
Mm-hmm.
And police officers, while they're, enforcers of the law, they don't go to law school. They don't learn how to talk like a lawyer. He's doing the right thing here in basically avoiding giving a concrete answer to questions he doesn't understand. If you want to make that your reasoning for suspecting somebody might not be truthful, go look at the Ramseys, who answered basically every question they were asked under any sworn situation with, I can't recall. I don't know. I don't remember. Like, I'm going to go through a few more of these. What was the question we were last asked?
Yeah, hang on. So I got to scroll up a little bit because we've gotten more.
Oh, boy.
Vice Forever for $5 says, can't wait for this to come out. Thank you so much for your hard work. Okay, so if the son hit and the dad choked and the mother wrote, then what about the essay?
Wait, reread that?
Essentially just with the roles that we are assuming hypothetically.
That's the one I'm struggling with.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, the only thing I can think of is that it popped into John Ramsey's head that nobody would ever suspect a family member of doing that. It's the only thing I can really think of.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from that, it's kind of hard to tell. I mean, fact of the matter is, it could be that was something Burke did. That is possible. And that it just wasn't as close to the time of death as was believed in 1996. So, wait, hang on. Jeff Shapiro was your confidential informant, right? Yes. So you had, during your investigation of JonBenet Ramsey's murder, a confidential informant who was a supermarket tabloid reporter for the Globe, right? Yes. The excerpt just ends there. To make it look like he's, yeah, you have. Did you bring up what Shapiro said? Apparently not. Like, since when is a cop having a criminal informant a reason to be suspicious?
It's not, considering that's standard practice.
Yeah, take a look, if you would, at page 45 of your book. First full paragraph. An acquaintance said that JonBenet was rebelling against appearing in the child beauty pageants. She was being pushed into the pageants by her mother and grandmother, said the witness. Who is that individual? I believe it was Judith Phillips. Did you find Judith Phillips to be credible? At times. Like, what?
None of that sounds.
These are so deliberately cut off.
Yeah.
I mean, to this person's credit, she did post the full ones. I don't think that this person who's posting this on Reddit is trying to be disingenuous, but I do think that, once again, missing the forest for the trees. Yeah, because here we go. Here's another one. On page 270 of your book, Chief Beckner started talking about a successful Title III electronic surveillance down in Florida, where the police had recorded the mother saying, the baby is dead and buried because you did it. And my father replied, I wish I hadn't harmed her. It was the cocaine. End quote. I considered the irony of Beckner discussing a title. This is also in quotations. I considered the irony of Beckner discussing a Title III that worked damned well in Florida when he had been part of the scandal-frightened leadership that wouldn't let us try the same tactic. End quote. Have I read that correctly? Steve Thomas says, I believe so. The question then is, that was the Ainsberg case, wasn't it, Mr. Thomas? That is the case being referred to here, yes. Right. You understand that charge was dismissed against the family because the transcripts of the tapes were not consistent with the representations made as to the content by the police. I'm not familiar with that. You hadn't tried to study what happened in the Ainsberg case at all? No, as we sit here today, I don't know the conclusion of the Ainsberg case. I'm going to look up when the Ainsberg case actually concluded.
It's worth knowing. I will say just, as you do that, so...
Also, that doesn't change the fact that the Title III surveillance worked.
Nope.
CC
Anarchy for $5 asking where Weird Bible questions can be submitted. I would say
on Weird Bible.
Yeah, either on Weird Bible when we actually do it, or email thelorelodge@gmail.com.
You can always comment on a video over there. We can see super chats even if they're just left as comments.
Yeah,
there are super comments and things now. So we can see those things if you leave them.
Yeah,
I think it's a super thanks or something.
Yeah. And then for the moment, I'll scroll back up because there was one not directly relevant super chat that was for $106. Big thank you on that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's from Michael P. and wanted to say, I noticed, especially when he, quote, played Delilah. Oh, wait. Okay. That Mr. Thornberry may share a rare talent with Mr. Howard Stern. Stern can do serious interviews in which he makes the guests forget that they're being interviewed. Unleash this talent at some point with one-on-one interviews on the channel. I will say I appreciate the compliment very much. For the series that we may be doing on Weird Bible, where we're going and interviewing different clergy men from different faiths, or at least different sects of Christianity at the very least. I don't know who's necessarily going to be answering the questions or how frequently Mattis will be able to do it compared to me, based off of researching schedule versus, we're trying to get me involved in more production and more shows so we can provide you guys more content. So I may just be doing that with other people.
Hang on. So the Ainsberg case, the book came out, Steve Thomas's book came out in 2000. The Ainsberg case wasn't resolved until 2001.
So it was completely irrelevant to that case.
Completely irrelevant, because what Steve Thomas wrote at the time was correct. The Title III electronic surveillance worked. It did get what they wanted. It was then misused in court. I mean, bro, I don't hate all lawyers, but damn do I hate lawyers.
Except for Morgan & Morgan, right?
Yeah, except for Morgan & Morgan. Was there any test done on the duct tape that would establish the imprint of JonBenet's lip prints on that tape? The answer is, was there any test that would establish that? Did you, all to your knowledge, did the Boulder Police Department conduct any test that would establish that the duct tape that was pulled off of her mouth by John Ramsey, that was then picked up by Fleet White, was found somehow to contain a perfect set of JonBenet's lip prints? Was any test performed that made that finding? There was an examination apparently done at some point, which was reported back to a detective briefing at which I was present, and I believe that it was Wickman or Trujillo that shared that information. Who conducted that examination? I don't know. Was it an expert of some type? I don't know that there is such thing as an expert examination, and there's no testing that I'm aware of. I think it's more of a common sense observation. So he's saying, this thing that was reported to me at a detective briefing by a detective is what I was told. And they're like, well, do you know who did the test? You can see why this didn't go to trial.
Yeah.
This lawsuit, why it was a settlement. Because, if you think you have him dead to rights on this, you're not going to settle.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to take it to trial. What else do we have here? After your book came out, sir, were you aware that Mr. Ubowski publicly denied the accuracy of the statement that he concluded Patsy Ramsey wrote the ransom note? He goes, no, you're telling me this for the first time. Are you familiar that Mr. Ubowski stated that he had never reached the conclusion that 24 of her letters out of the 26 letters of the alphabet were matched with the ransom note? No, I have not heard that. And you stated the contrary in your book, didn't you? Yeah, I stated what I was told by my detective sergeant. And you weren't even, I guess, aware that Mr. Ubowski and the CBI said they don't even make that kind of analysis with respect to the 24 out of the 26 letters of the alphabet? You don't know anything about that? No. In terms of the public statement made by the CBI after your book was published, the CBI made a public statement? Yes, sir. Like, they're just trying to get him, and they keep failing to get him.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually incredible reading through this list that somebody thinks this is points against Steve Thomas.
If anything, it's points for him being both intelligent and capable, especially when being grilled by lawyers.
Yeah, and on top, and they're ignoring the fact that the DA was obstructing everything at this point. Did you ever seek to interview the Richardson twins who live with Melody Stanton? No. Why not? Because I was unaware of these people. Did anybody in the Boulder Police Department make an attempt, to your knowledge, to interview the two 30-year-old twins, the Richardson twins, that lived with Melody Stanton? Not that I'm aware of. Yeah, did you interview these people you weren't aware existed?
Kind of hard to do that.
Like, this is actually wild. How about the two friends of Fleet White that were there? Did you all ever get any non-testimonial evidence from those two individuals? Which two friends are you referring to? The ones that were with him on Christmas and were at the Ramseys on, I believe, the party of the 23rd. Do you know who I'm talking about? Mr. Fleet's house guests at the time? Yes, his friends that were the house guests. Did you all get any non-testimonial evidence, hair, DNA, handwriting from Mr. Cox or Mr. Gaston? I believe that Detective Harmer received that assignment and made attempts to conduct that investigation, and I'm not sure whether or not she was successful in those attempts. Like, every single thing here that they attempt to get him on, they fail. And these are the cut, selectively edited versions. I'm not seeing anything in the deposition that shows Steve Thomas to be an unreliable detective. In fact, what I'm seeing is a guy who knows how lawyers operate. And is deliberately avoiding saying anything that they will misconstrue publicly or in court. I mean, I'm just disgusted by the lawyers involved in this case.
Yeah, it's actually sad.
And what pisses me off too, the police brought in, because the DA lawyers weren't doing their job. The police were like, we need somebody in our corner who knows the law, like not the way we do, the way lawyers do. So they went and got a whole bunch of actual prosecutors, 3 of them, if I remember correctly, and said, hey, we can't pay you much, but we need help. And they basically went, given the circumstances, yeah, you got us. Whatever you need. We'll even prosecute it. Like, if they want to hire us to come in and prosecute the case, we will. The DA refused. The DA did not listen to these guys. Multiple times in meetings with deputy district attorneys, Pete Hofstrom, for example, would say, well, because of this statute, I can't do that. And the dream team, they called them, would be like, no, you can. You just won't. I mean, that's the best you can pull out of the deposition to be anti-Steve Thomas? Really? I mean, maybe I'll end up eating my words on this, but as far as I'm concerned right now, Steve Thomas is a damn hero. I mean, without his tenacity, I don't think that we ever learn any of the truth about this case. So
I agree.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe I'll end up being wrong about that, and I'll have to eat those words. But right now, I'm everything I read. The more I read, from both sides of it, the more skeptical I get of the Ramseys. So again, in my opinion.
So ODD, Car Garage, and Damon Mahan, appreciate the compliments there. Just a couple like general compliments, much appreciated.
For you? About your hair?
Well, there have been a couple of people saying I look like Legolas, which I think is really entertaining.
Yeah, you shave the beard and you kind of, yeah.
Well, and it's entertaining to me considering I'm in the middle of a first time watch for Lord of the Rings, because the only other time we watched it, or I watched it,
I kind of put him through the gauntlet on that one. That was my bad.
He put me through the extended version all in a row gauntlet in high school before I knew anything about Lord of the Rings, and I enjoyed it at the time, but I remembered absolutely none of it. And I started watching them with Kat, and like before even knowing who it was, I was like, oh, that character. That's who I like. I'm gonna like this guy. And then of course he ends up being a ranger. I'm like, I dig rangers. This is it. It's a shame that I didn't watch this when I was younger, because I would have made this my entire personality. I like this dude a lot. And then they reveal it's Aragorn, and I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense a lot. So ironic that you say I look like Legolas, considering I'm full send on Aragorn.
Okay.
Anyway, so yeah, that, and then Specifically, ODD Car Garage was saying, love the dedicated research on the topics. Fairly new subscriber, but keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Big thank you. And then Damon Mahan for 1999 says, Aiden is a cutie, no specificity on which, so it could be either of us. So we're both going to take that as a compliment. Thank you.
What point in the live stream are we at, by the way? About
we're 2.5 hours in. Okay. Yeah. A bunch of people demanding the calendar in a variety of
we're working
ways.
on it.
Yep. And then there were 2 more serious ones. Yeah, here they are. So Anthony Tiff for $5 says, I lost my father at 14 years old, and it was extremely tragic and unexpected. I did not laugh. I am now 20, and I still tear up when I think about it, which is,
you
know,
the normal response from a human being with emotions.
Yep. And then the Mangled Wither for $20 right after that. Thank you very much, but is also somewhat relevant to that. Saying, I have a couple questions. Last year, my dogs Luke and Toy, I believe, died, and it hasn't gotten easier, and I blame myself for their death. Wow. My question is, does it get better? Second question is, the Cult Navy, may I have a Viking longboat? First of all, I'm very sorry. Do not blame yourself, because that's not fair to yourself, and it's just inaccurate. 2, yes, obviously, you can have a Viking longboat. More than welcome, more than happy to have it, but for your side on the other element of it.
What was the other element? Sorry.
Just does it get easier?
Losing your dogs?
Yeah.
I haven't lost a dog yet, and I don't expect to handle it well at all.
Yeah, I've never had a pet, so
yeah, I am not looking forward to either of those 2 going, especially because when one goes, the other will probably follow shortly after. They are a small breed and a large breed who are approximately 4 years apart. So. Not excited about it. By the way, every time I open Reddit, my faith in humanity just crumbles because I'm looking through the responses to that, and everybody's like, "He looks so dumb." Like, if you think the lawyers weren't deliberately wording those questions in ways that were unanswerable, you're stupid. It was a deposition. This was about a lawsuit. He was being sued by the Ramseys.
Yeah. Yeah, you're either... I would attribute that...
I'm excited to go through the deposition. I'm actually excited. Like, that's the part I've been wanting to get to. To be honest, all of this has been a slog so that I can get to the interviews and be like, here's all the places these people lied, and here's all the places these people were consistent. Because I've yet to see something that Steve Thomas said that was a lie, and I've seen at least 5 things the Ramseys said that were lies. Like, not, slightly different ways of saying the same thing. Lies. If they try to sue me for that, I will find more.
The $18.99 for $10 says, howdy from South Dakota. You might find it interesting that we have a Lakota Bigfoot legend of a Bigfoot with the ability to mimic voices and animal calls to lure people to their deaths called Takuhe.
Huh?
Howdy from South Dakota. You might find it interesting that we have a Lakota Bigfoot legend of a Bigfoot with the ability to mimic voices and animal calls to lure people to their deaths called the Takuhe.
Something was going on here. Something was going on this continent. There's too many stories of that. And they're from too many different places for it to be describing like one unknown tribe. Yeah. I don't even believe in Bigfoot as it's described, but I'm genuinely confused as to where all of these similar legends come from.
Yeah.
I have to wonder if it's stuff that they like came up with as they were passing through Canada, like on the way down here, and those stories just lasted millennia. But then again, how many stories do we have between European cultures that have lasted millennia?
Not many that aren't religious.
Yeah, exactly.
There was one.
I gotta wonder if there were, like, we would have found remains by now.
Well, I mean,
there were like another species of humans here.
Well, they just found one like this week.
Where?
I think it was in China.
Yeah, that's my point. Like,
no, but I mean, like, think about how much land in the U.S. is not
true, and it
even remotely investigated.
Yeah, I guess we have native American skeletons from that far back, though. I mean, I guess it's possible if they were a more wild people who didn't have proper burial practices. Yeah.
Even if they did, I mean, think about like we
There
don't
would have been fewer of them.
we don't do preliminary archaeological digs before like a new Walmart's built.
Well, I mean, yeah, you're right that we don't like do it every time, but if they find something, they do stop.
True. Well, the ones who are decent and report it.
Yeah, true.
So, you know, and there is so much construction that happens on a daily basis in this country.
I can see where you're coming from.
J.A. Kell for $20 just said, ever thought of looking into the Black Dahlia? There's, I think there's anything to look into. I'm not familiar with it, are you?
Guess I'm looking up what Black Dahlia is.
And then kind of a sad one, but worth noting, Mo Fox for $5 says, I lost my best friend to the S word.
I'm sorry.
When I was 13, and honestly, I've always joked about it, but it's still something I cry about. People are crazy. Yeah, I mean, I remember there was something that happened in middle school. There was a kid who did that, and I remember it was across the school, wide variety of different responses to that. So, I mean, no one can blame you for grieving in your own way.
Middle school? Was that Springford?
Yeah.
Okay, I was going to say, because I didn't hear about this.
Yeah.
I would have thought that if it was EA.
No,
that was
yeah.
from my community, even if it wasn't my school, so.
Yeah, no, this was Springford.
Gotcha.
It was, 7th grade.
Jeez.
Yeah.
We had a few. I don't know that we had anybody who was middle school, but we had several people while I was in high school.
Really?
I think 2. Definitely 1, but I feel like there were 2.
It's horrible.
Somebody else died from an overdose after high school.
Stuff.
Yeah. Well, that one actually wasn't. Dude was a piece of shit.
Fair enough.
Dude was a piece of shit who I have a very personal reason to hate.
Ah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Lorelei for $100. Thank you very much. Said, I'm behind on tonight's stream, but I wanted to thank you guys for everything you've done. I found you and binged all of the videos. I love watching the growth over time and how you've been open to new information and changed opinions based on that. Rare quality these days.
Thank you. I'm glad that is noticed, because I don't think, if there's one thing I don't think I can be accused of, and it's being stuck in my ways.
Yeah, definitely not. No, we pride ourselves on getting the right information and the right version of the story. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if things come up that contradict a previous hypothesis,
yep,
we're going to change.
Mm-hmm.
Emerald Queen for $4.99 says, as someone who just lost your goldfish of 10 years, I'm sorry for your loss. It's never easy to lose a loved one.
No,
definitely not.
It's not.
It's really not.
Yeah, my family's dog that I have grown up with since I was, I think, 12. I'm 27. She's going to be 15.
Yeah, it's going to be tough.
So I just saw her today. She actually looks great. Like she looks very spunky. Every time she hangs out with Archie, it's like she de-ages several months.
Yep.
So I'm optimistic about her, but yeah, I had a moment today where I was like, oh God, you've been with me as long as I can remember. I'm not going to be okay.
Understandably so. I'll be sad.
Yeah.
J-Mo, well done on making me chuckle there at saying for $2, I wasn't paying any attention. Can you repeat everything?
Oh, yeah, all of it. You know?
Yeah.
I told him earlier in the Discord that every time I open Berserk, I take 20 psychic damage.
Fitting.
Yeah.
Her Royal Pain for $10 says, I was in high school when a murder happened to a sophomore and his killer was never tried, but everyone knows who did it. Rip Christian Nodge, didn't know you, but you were a remembered kid.
Send us an email about that. Because if the evidence is there and he just never went to prison, the killer, we can allege a lot of things before we're in suit territory.
Yeah. Isabel for $2 says, yeah, you said hypothesis.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff D for $2 says, hope you guys get invited on Unsubscribe podcast, and boy, do we have a surprise for you.
We've actually been on Unsubscribe, and we hope to go back.
Yes.
Great
guys.
We may even end up doing more than just being on Unsubscribe, where we're having talks. Of course, it is a bunch of YouTubers trying to have talks, which means that I talked to Eli about this a month ago, and we have not talked again yet.
Not his fault.
Not even his fault. That's just how it goes.
It's the nature of YouTubers.
Yeah. We all need personal assistants.
It's true.
Realistically, we all need the same personal assistant who just talks to us for each other.
You begin to understand why so many of the actors and other creative people,
I get it, yeah.
Yeah, they have all that because, creative people just, nope.
Yeah, I need somebody who is just constantly in my ear, like, you have to do this. And the thing is, it can't be Amanda, because then I just kind of, like, I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. And she does not have the ability to, like, yell at me.
Would Ainsley be interested in being your personal assistant?
I think Ainsley could do it. This is my little sister, by the way. She could definitely do it. She'd be great at it. I think we'd both hate it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because she'd be a little too effective.
Be a little too effective at it, yeah.
Yeah.
We had her come in to help us with our books, and she basically was like, stop spending money, you idiots. We didn't realize we were spending that much.
But we listened.
Yeah, we did, for the most part. We spent a lot of money in Tennessee.
And also yesterday.
And also yesterday. But that was for a good reason.
It's for a great reason, so you don't go through what you went through.
Getting a little angry yesterday,
yeah.
With being unable to properly get through my script that I wrote myself.
It's more than justified at this point.
Yeah, we needed a teleprompter.
Yeah. Beck Farrell said for $5, my cousin OD'd on purpose after 4 years clean. It's 2 years. I still cry at times. Yeah, understandable. So sorry.
Yeah, that's how we lost one of them.
Yeah, it's tough.
It was heroin.
Rough.
Which sucks, because he really was, like, better. Like, he was doing a lot better.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, we had some fun and funny ones earlier on, but they don't feel quite
Funny
appropriate.
now. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
No,
but it is also 9:39.
Yeah. I'll tell you what. The ones that were fun and funny that we didn't get to this week, we'll read them next week.
Yeah.
When I cover something less dark. I mean, we'll still be right after the second episode of JonBenet, but I'm taking a break from JonBenet for a week, partially for my own sanity and partially because you guys tend to get fatigued when we cover the same thing too many weeks in a row.
And considering how many weeks this is going to end up being.
I thought this was going to be 2 parts. It's now definitely 3, almost certainly 4, possibly 5. So, it's going to be a while. So you guys are getting a video on, what did I decide? Right, Bell's Canyon. Next week you're getting Bell's Canyon. And then eventually the Superstition Mountains, because originally I was like, oh, this is stupid. It's just a story to explain away how you got all this gold that you probably stole off of a wagon. And then I got a little further into it, and I was like, oh no. There's a lot of weird deaths here. So I was going to cover that, and then I was like, nope, that needs to wait, and I need to order some books that also aren't on Kindle.
Fun.
So fun.
I look forward to bringing that bookshelf up here, putting it back there, and having all the books
Which
that you've
bookshelf?
researched with, the one that's downstairs.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Yeah, and we'll start putting all the books that you've used for research on that, and just progressively get it bigger and bigger.
This room's going to be so full of books, man.
It's going to be great. It'll be great sound editing.
That's true, yeah. God, I've read so many books for this job.
Ballpark.
Dozens. I don't know the exact number. But dozens.
Yeah.
Probably ballpark somewhere around 40 to 50 in the last 3 years. And not fun books. Very dry books.
What's the best one you've had to read so far?
I think I really like Steve Thomas's. But I also really liked the Boy in the Box one. It's hard to say because most of them I read in such a weird manner where I was kind of jumping around looking for stuff. Read them all the way through, just in an indirect way.
Fair. I will say, because it is supposedly his birthday tomorrow.
Okay.
I will read JMO's.
Okay.
Because he sent 2. One is Drink Up Your Milk, Boys. I'm turning 20 tomorrow. Congrats.
Congratulations.
Mattis asked for video ideas. I say Berserk lore video or Bete du Gevaudan?
East of Gevaudan.
Yeah. The Glaucus of Glastonbury, Connecticut would be a fun one to do as well. And then he asked Thornbussy, what do your elf eyes see?
What do they see?
A very pretty man.
Oh, thank you.
We're never beating the allegations.
Never beating the allegations.
And with that,
he sleeps near me, not next to me.
Not with him.
Not in the same apartment either. He's a whole 2 walls away from me.
Yes. Unless I fall asleep on the couch.
In which case, he's literally right across the other side of a wall from me.
Yes.
This was not intentional.
Nope.
We did not mean to live next to each other.
We have progressively getting closer and closer
it's true.
to that.
Go us.
Go us.
Living the dream. All right.
It's pretty impressive for our history that things just continue to get better.
Yeah, that's kind of nice.
It is.
All right, well.
Look, you can in fact do it.
You can do it. So just because it is getting very late and there are many chats and not all of them are topical and some of them are riddled with ussy, they were going to close this episode here, and then I will either get to the unanswered questions and comments on the next one of these, or if I am somehow able to get a stream in before that, then I will do it then.
When's the last time you had one?
Oh, God, October.
Really, that long?
I think so. Yeah, because we were in Tennessee for the first week of November.
Yep.
It was October. And it was probably mid-October because I had to get like 3 videos done in a week.
Yeah.
So I miss it. I hopped on to play Call of Duty with my friends for the first time in months. Actually, the first time in almost a year for Call of Duty because I got really pissed at Modern Warfare 3 and quit.
Fair.
And they were all like, oh my God, look who had time for us.
Yeah. Oh, I get that too. I barely play any video games at all anymore, let alone with friends.
Yeah. Have them like in Bellwright, though. Gives me a throw on a show in the background. I make myself a cup of coffee or tea. Play my little medieval village building game.
Nice.
Yeah, it's nice. All right. Well, everybody, thank you for being here. It was so kind of you. I hope we weren't too discombobulated. And
I think this was one of the most on track.
Yeah, I would say we stayed on topic almost the whole time. So yeah, once I finish up the series, I will come back and anything I thought. What?
One last question, because somebody had asked earlier too. Any updates on Sebastian Rogers?
Not at the moment. There just hasn't really been any movement from what I understand. The FBI is involved to the extent that they have put out a reward for information. I don't know. I feel like the truth about that case is so obvious, and in this circumstance, it's just the police refusing to do their jobs. I mean, that family should never have been allowed to leave town. All of the same mistakes that were made with JonBenet Ramsey were made with the Rogers family, and that is so disheartening to see that nobody learned anything. Yeah, so I do think they're extremely similar cases. They are so similar.
Yeah,
in terms of the parents' behavior. I will say, I mean, the one thing this has done, studying JonBenet Ramsey, is it's made me more confident that Katie could be in on it.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So, I don't know. It's hard to say if anything will ever happen with that case. I have become considerably less confident that Sebastian is still alive. Early on, it was my hope. I thought there was definitely a possibility of that. It's now at the point where I can't see how he could be. You can't hide him this long, this effectively. He need to go to a doctor. He need to, he need to be in school. Like there would be something. He's gonna need clothes, food. Somebody wouldn't know something's off. So, unfortunately, I do think it's very possible that it was a murder, not a kidnapping. Yeah, that one makes me sad. Because it was very much solvable. I think it's very obvious who's responsible. I think the motive is there. I think that the history is there. In that case, we have a guy who has admitted to abusing his stepson. We have a guy who is on record in the court system as having attempted to kidnap his own daughter using the legal system, who has been sent to conflict resolution and parenting classes, who has been repeatedly denied custody of his daughter in spite of trying over and over, in spite of, going out of his way to make it seem like the mother was unfit. I don't know. I genuinely cannot comprehend how this has not been solved, but unfortunately the FBI can only get involved if it's reported as a kidnapping, and it never has been. It's always just been he ran away. I mean, in my opinion, if he had run away, he would have been found by now. There is totally probable cause to go and call this a kidnapping and ask for the FBI's help.
The question is, why are they not?
Close enough to a state line? Like, I think they're not, because this is a small town in Tennessee. It's not that small. It's like 60,000 people. But this is a rural Tennessee county for the most part. I think it's not insignificant that when I asked I think it was the sheriff's department, does Christopher Proudfoot have any friends at the sheriff's department? And they told me he's not friends with the sheriff. That's not what I asked. I think that's significant, because I very clearly said, does Christopher Proudfoot have connections or friends at the sheriff's department? And what I was told, Christopher Proudfoot is not friends with the sheriff. And then it's really interesting. The sheriff dies in an accident a couple months later.
Do you think we're going to be doing an update on this case when the 1-year anniversary of it comes around?
Possibly. If there's enough movement, I think at the very least I will put together a summary version that kind of combines everything in the 3 videos we did into one thing, and then kind of goes from there. But we'll see. I hate how many dead kids I know everything about.
Yeah, it's a real chipper, upbeat channel you guys watch. But we are grateful that you watch nonetheless.
I just wish it was about a different topic.
Yeah.
But hey, this is what I'm good at. So
hopefully all of the research you do and all of the work we do to put these videos out will generate some level of positive change.
That's what I hope.
In one of these things.
I wanted to make history videos. God was like, nope. You're doing unsolved missing persons cases that involve children. I'm gonna go home and hug my dogs and my girlfriend. Because I need to.
Yep. I'm gonna hug my girlfriend and attempt to hug the cat.
Yeah, good luck with that. You could hug the turtle.
Well, that might give me like salmonella though.
Yeah, it's true.
And the cat's just gonna make my face run like a waterfall.
That's fair. Good luck.
Thanks.
All right, well, thanks, guys. See you next time.